good afternoon. Welcome to my stream. I'm sorry. It's always every time I gonna switch to the the streaming side. I always forget to close certain things. Ah, hang on, let me. I'm sorry. Let me figure things out properly. Okay. All right. That should be fine. That should be fine. Hello, welcome to my stream again. Um, okay, today I don't know how long I'll read. Last time I said that I'll read for 3 hours, which I did. I think I did, but my stream ended up like the 3 hours and 44 minutes. I think a lot of it is just me yapping, as I always do. Yapper, yapper, yapper. Anyway, I have tea. I have coffee. I'm pretty much ready to start now. Um, yeah. Okay. As the title says, we're reading from chapter 12 onwards because we ended at chapter 11 yesterday. My static actually asked me if I want to practice M8S in an hour's time, and I'm like, damn. Would love to join, but I already basically told everyone that I'm doing this. Therefore, can't really suddenly back out from my own schedule. Anyway, I don't expect anyone's gonna be here, so I'm gonna put the camera on my face. Also, by the way, you know what's annoying? I'll show you what's annoying. So this is okay. Sorry, this emote is read. I think, yeah, read, right? And I have to make a macro for it. That it just repeats the read emote for like 10 times, 12 times, something like that. So sometimes my book will just go down and I have to like repress it and then re-click the button to wait for it for the macro to continue. And then recently they came up with like study, right? And study is like you it's basically like a constant repeating emote like non-stop. But you know what's funny? You can't do it when you're sitting down. You can only study when you are standing. That's the genius of Square Enix right there. You can only study when you are standing. You can't study when you are sitting down. So yeah, I was looking forward to using this. I was like so happy when I heard they're doing this. I thought, oh cool, now I don't have to keep pressing the read button whenever I have to like loop uh my my reading emote. But yeah, great shit, guys. I love Square Enix so much. Anyway, without further ado, I think we should just I should just shut the fuck up. And we should start reading for reals. Um, if you happen to hear any noise, I apologize. I have the window open. Uh, because I need some air, and I don't want to be in the aircon all the time. So, there will be some noises in the background. I hope the microphone won't pick up. In my experience, my microphone is pretty good at not picking up small noises. So, anyways, yap 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 yap. So much yapping. Anyway, welcome to my stream. To whoever who's in my stream, I thank you for joining us today. And we are currently reading Sylvia Plath, the Bell Jar. I think it's basically her only novel that she ever released, and it's an semi autobiographical um, novel. Sorry. Anyway, I think I repeat that a lot last time. I'm just afraid, like, because I've been away for so long from my reading session, that I always think that people don't see me as the person who reads on stream anymore, and I'm kind of sad about that. And it's all my own doing, nobody's doing. Anyway, fuck, I'm just like mute my phone. Hang on. Anyway, we're gonna start now. I hope I won't bore you guys at all. I really don't. But reading session is just me reading, basically. It's called Noodible because it's a play on word with audible. I don't know why I keep saying all these like basic things about what I do on my streams when that's basically what I did for like forever. If you check my YouTube at all, most of my content, I have over 250 videos, and most of it is just reading sessions. So anyway, shut up. Stop yapping. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to continue Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, chapter 12. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Dr. Gordon's private hospital crowned a grassy rise at the end of a long secluded drive that had been whitened with broken quahog shells. The yellow clapboard walls of the large house with its encircling veranda gleamed in the sun. But no people strolled on the green dome of the lawn. As my mother and I approached, the summer heat bore down on us, and a cicada started up like an aerial lawnmower in the heart of a copper beech tree at the back. The sound of the cicada only served to underline the enormous silence. A nurse met us at the door. "Will you wait in the living room, please? Dr. Gordon will be with you presently." What bothered me was that everything about the house seemed normal, although I knew it must be chock full of crazy people. There were no bars on the windows that I could see, and no wild or disquieting noises. Sunlight measured itself in irregular oblongs on the shabby, but the soft red carpets and a whiff of fresh cut grass sweetened the air. I paused in the doorway of the living room. For a minute I thought it was the replica of a lounge in a guest house I once visited on an island off the coast of Maine. The French doors let in a dazzle of white light, and a grand piano filled the far corner of the room, and people in summer clothes were sitting about at the card tables and in the lopsided wicker armchairs one so often find at the down-at-heel seaside resorts. Then I realized that none of the people were moving. I focused more closely, trying to pry some clue from their stiff postures. I made out men and women and boys and girls who must be as young as I, but there was a uniformity to their faces, as if they had lain for a long time on a shelf, out of the sunlight under the sifting of pale fine dust. Then I saw some of the people were indeed moving, but with such small bird-like gestures I had not at first discerned them. A grey-faced man was counting out a deck of cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. I thought he must be seeing if it was a full pack, but when he had finished counting, he started over again. Next to him, a fat lady played a string of wooden beads. She drew all the beads up to one end of the string, then click, 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 she let them fall back on each other. At the piano, a young girl leafed through a few sheets of music, but when she saw me looking at her, she ducked her head crossly and tore the sheets in half. My mother touched my arm, and I followed her into the room. We sat, without speaking, on a lumpy sofa that creaked each time one stirred. When my gaze slid over the people to the blaze of green beyond the the diaphanous curtains, and I felt as if I were sitting in the window of an enormous department store. The figures around me weren't people, but shop dummies, painted to resemble people and propped up in attitudes counterfeiting life. I climbed after Dr. Gordon's dark-jacketed bag. Downstairs in the hall, I tried to ask him what the shock treatment would be like. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. My eyes only widened and stared at the smiling, familiar face that floated before me like a plate full of assurances. At the top of the stairs, the garnet-colored carpet stopped. A plain brown linoleum, tacked to the floor, took its place and extended down a corridor lined with shut white doors. As I followed Dr. Gordon, a door opened somewhere in the distance and I heard a woman shouting. All at once, a nurse popped around the corner of the corridor ahead of us, leading a woman in a blue bathrobe with shaggy, waist-length hair. Dr. Gordon stepped back and I flattened against the wall. As the woman was dragged by, waving her arms and struggling in the grip of the nurse, she was saying, "I'm going to jump out of the window! I'm going to jump out of the window! I'm going to jump out of the window!" Dumpy and muscular in her smudge-fronted uniform, the wall-eyed nurse wore such thick spectacles that 4 eyes peered out at me from behind the round, twin panes of glass. I was trying to tell which eye were the real eyes, and which was the false eyes, and which of the real eyes was the wall eye, and which the straight eye, when she brought her face up to mine with a large conspiratorial grin and hissed, as if to reassure me. She thinks she's going to jump out of the window, but she can't jump out of the window because they are all barred. And as Dr. Gordon led me into a bare room at the back of the house, I saw that the windows in that part were indeed barred, and that the room door and the closet door and the drawers of the bureau and everything that opened and shut was fitted with a keyhole so that it could be locked up. I lay down on the bed. The wall-eyed nurse came back. She unclasped my watch and dropped it into her pocket. Then she started tweaking the hairpins from my hair. Dr. Gordon was unlocking the closet. He dragged out a table on wheels with a machine on it and rolled it behind the head of the bed. The nurse started swabbing my temples with smelly grease. As she leaned over to reach the side of my head nearest to the wall, her fat breast muffled my face like a cloud of a pillow. A vague, medicinal stench emanated from her flesh. "Don't worry," the nurse grinned down at me. "There are first times everybody's scared to death." I tried to smile, but my skin had gone stiff, like parchment. Dr. Gordon was fitting 2 metal plates on either side of my head. He buckled them into place with a strap that dented my forehead and gave me a wire to bite. I shut my eyes. There was a brief silence, like an indrawn breath. Then something bent down and took hold of me and shook me like the end of the world. It shrilled through an air crackling with blue light, and with each flash a great jolt dropped me till I thought my bones would break and the sap fly out of me like a split plant. I wondered what terrible thing it was that I had done. I was sitting in a wicker chair, holding a small cocktail glass of tomato juice. The watch had been replaced on my wrist, but it looked odd. Then I realized that it had been fastened upside down. I sensed the unfamiliar positioning of the hairpins in my hair. "How do you feel?" An old metal door lamp surfaced in my mind. One of the few relics of my father's study, it was surmounted by a copper bell which held the light bulb, and from which a frayed tiger-colored cord ran down the length of the metal strand to a socket in the wall. One day, I decided to move this lamp from one side of my mother's bed to my desk at the other end of the room. The cord would be long enough, so I didn't unplug it. I closed both hands around the lamp and the fuzzy cord and gripped them tight. Then something leaped out of the lamp in a blue flash and shook me till my teeth rattled, and I tried to pull my hands off, but they were stuck. And I screamed. Our scream was torn from my throat, for I didn't recognize it, but heard it soar and quaver in the air like a violently disembodied spirit. Then my hands jerked free, and I fell back onto my mother's bed. A small hole, blackened as if with pencil lead, pitted the center of my right palm. How do you feel? All right, but I didn't. I felt terrible. Which college did you say you went to? I said what college it was. Ah! Dr. Gordon's face lighted with a slow, almost tropical smile. They had a WAC station up there, didn't they, during the war? My mother's knuckles were bone white, as if the skin had worn off them in the hour of waiting. She looked past me to Dr. Gordon, and he must have nodded or smiled because her face relaxed. A few more shock treatments, Mrs. Greenwood, I heard Dr. Gordon say, and I think you'll notice a wonderful improvement. The girl was sitting on the piano stool. The torn sheet of music played at her feet like a dead bird. She stared at me, and I stared back. Her eyes narrowed. She stuck out her tongue. My mother was following Dr. Gordon's to the door. I lingered behind, and when their backs were turned, I rounded on the girl and thumbed both ears at her. She pulled her tongue in, and her face went stony. I walked out into the sun. Panther-like in a dapple of tree shadow, Dodo Conway's black station wagon lay in wait. The station wagon had been ordered originally by a wealthy society lady, black without a speck of chrome, and with black leather upholstery, and when it came, it depressed her. It was the dead spirit of a hearse, she said, and everybody else thought so too, and nobody would buy it. So the Conways drove it home, cut price, and saved themselves a couple of $100. Sitting in the front seat between Dodo and my mother, I felt dumb and subdued. Every time I tried to concentrate, my mind glided off like a skater into a large empty space and pirouetted there absently. I'm through with that Dr. Gordon, I said, after we had left Dodo and her black wagon behind the pines. You can call him up and tell him I'm not coming next week. My mother smiled. I knew my baby wasn't like that. I looked at her. Like what? Like all those awful people. Those awful dead people at the hospital. She paused. I knew you would decide to be all right again. Headline: Starlet succumbs after 68-hour coma. I felt in my pocketbook among the paper scraps and the compact, and the peanut shells and the dimes and the nickels and the blue jiffy box containing 19 gillette blades, till I unearthed the snapshot that I had taken that afternoon in that orange and white striped booth. I brought it up next to the smudgy photograph of the dead girl. It matched, mouth for mouth, nose for nose. The only difference was the eyes. The eyes in the snapshot were open, and those in the newspaper photograph were closed. But I knew if the dead girl's eyes were to be thumb wide, they would look out at me in the same dead, black, vacant expression as the eyes in the snapshot. I stuffed the snapshot back in my pocketbook. I will just sit here in the sun on this park bench 5 minutes more by the clock on that building over there, I told myself, and then I will go somewhere and do it. I summoned my little chorus of voices. Doesn't your work interest you, Esther? You know, Esther, you have got the perfect setup of a true neurotic. You'll never get anywhere like that. You will never get anywhere like that. You will never get anywhere like that. Once, on a hot summer night, I had spent an hour kissing a hairy, ape-shaped law student from Yale because I felt sorry for him. He was so ugly. When I had finished, he said, I have you taped, baby. You'll be a prude at 40. Factitious, my creative writing professor at college scrawled on a story of mine called The Big Weekend. I hadn't known what factitious meant, so I looked it up in the dictionary. Factitious. Artificial. Sham. You'll never get anywhere like that. I hadn't slept for 21 nights. I thought the most beautiful thing in the world must be shadow, the million moving shapes and cul-de-sacs of shadows. There were shadows in bureau drawers and closets and suitcases and shadow under houses and trees and stones and shadow at the back of people's eyes and smiles and shadow miles and miles and miles of it on the night side of the earth. I looked down at the two flesh-colored band-aids forming a cross on the calf of my right leg. That morning, I had made a start. I had locked myself in the bathroom, run a tub full of warm water, taking out a gillette blades. When they asked some old Roman philosopher or other how he wanted to die, he said he would open his veins in warm bath. I thought it would be easy. Lying in the tub and seeing the redness flower from my wrist, flush after flush, through the clear water till I sank to sleep under a surface gaudy as poppies. But when it come right down to it, the skin of my wrist looked so white and defenseless that I couldn't do it. It was as if what I wanted to kill wasn't in that skin or in that thin blue pulse that jumped under my thumb, but somewhere else, deeper, more secret, and a whole lot harder to get at. It would take two motions, one wrist, then the other wrist. 3 motions if you counted changing the razor from hand to hand, when I would step into the tub and lie down. I moved in front of the medicine cabinet. If I looked in the mirror while I did it, it would be like watching somebody else in a book or a play. But the person in the mirror was paralyzed and too stupid to do a thing. Then I thought maybe I ought to spill a little blood for practice. So I sat on the edge of the tub and crossed my right ankle over my left knee. And then I lifted my right hand with the razor and let it drop its own weight, like a guillotine, onto the calf of my leg. I felt nothing. Then I felt a small, deep thrill, and a bright seam of red well up at the lip of the slash. The blood gathered darkly like fruit and rolled down my ankle into the cup of my black patent leather shoes. I thought of getting into the tub then, but I realized my dallying had used up the better part of the morning, and that my mother would probably come home and find me before I was done. So I bandaged the cut, packed up my gillette blades, and caught the 11:30 bus to Boston. Sorry, baby, there's no subway to the Deer Island prison. It's on an island. No, it's not on an island. It used to be on an island, but they filled up the water with dirt, and now it joins on to the mainland. There's no subway. I've got to get there. Hey, the fat man at the ticket booth peered at me through the grating. Don't cry. Who got there? Who you got there, honey? Some relative? People shoved and bumped by me, but in the artificially lit dark, hurrying after the trains that rumble in and out of the intestinal tunnels under Scully Square. I could feel the tears start to spurt from the sear wet up nozzles of my eyes. It's my father. The fat man consulted a diagram on the wall of his booth. Here's how you do, he said. You take a car from the track over there and get off at Orient Heights, then hop on a bus with the point on it. He beamed at me. It will run you straight to the prison gate. Hey you! A young fellow in blue uniform waved from the hut. I waved back and kept on going. Hey you! I stopped and walked slowly over to the hut that perched like a circular living room on the waste of sands. Hey, you can't go any further. That's prison property. No trespassers allowed. I thought you could go any place along the beach, I said, so long as you stay under the tide line. The fellow thought a minute. Then he said, Not this beach. He had a pleasant, fresh face. You have a nice place here, I said. It's like a little house. He glanced back into the room with its braided rug and chintz curtains. He smiled. We even got a coffee pot. I used to live near here. No kidding. I was born and brought up in this town myself. I looked across the sands to get to the parking lot and the barred gate, and past the barred gate to the narrow road lapped by the oceans on both sides that led out to the one-time island. The red brick buildings of the prison looked friendly, like the buildings of a seaside college. On the green hump of lawn to the left, I could see small white spots and slightly larger pink spots moving about. I asked the guards what they are, and he said, Them pigs and chickens. I was thinking that if I had had the sense to go on living in that old town, I might just met this prison guard in school and married him and had a parcel of kids by now. It would be nice, living up by the sea with piles of little kids and pigs and chickens, wearing what my grandmother called wash dresses, and sitting about in some kitchen with bright linoleum and fat arms, drinking pots of coffee. How do you get into that prison? You get a pass. No, how do you get locked in? Oh, the guard laughed. You steal a car, you rob a store. You got any murderers in there? No, murderers go to the big state place. Who else is in there? Well, the first day of winter we get these old bums out of Boston. They heave a brick through a window, and then they get picked up and spend the winter out of the cold with TV and plenty to eat and basketball games on the weekend. That's nice. Nice if you like it, said the guard. I said goodbye and started to move off, glancing back over my shoulder only once. The guard still stood in the doorway of his observation booth, and when I turned, he lifted his arm in a salute. The log I sat on was lead-heavy and smelt of tar. Under the stout grey cylinder of the water tower on its commanding hill, the sandbar curved out into the sea. At high tide, the bar completely submerged itself. I remember the sandbar well. It harbored in the crook of its inner curve a particular shell that could be found nowhere else on the beach. The shell was thick, smooth, big as a thumb joint, and usually white, although sometimes pink or peach-colored. It resembled a sort of modest conch. Sorry. Mummy, the girl's still sitting there. I looked up idly and saw a small sandy child being dragged up from the sea's edge by a skinny bird-eye woman in red shorts and red and white polka-dotted halter. I hadn't counted on the beach being overrun with summer people. In the 10 years of my absence, fancy blue and pink and pale green shanties had sprung up on the flat sands of the point like a crop of tasteless mushrooms, and the silver aeroplanes and cigar-shaped blimps that had given way to jets that scoured the rooftops in their loud off-rush from the airport across the bay. I was the only girl on the beach in skirt and high heels, and it occurred to me that I must stand out. I had to remove my patent leather shoes after a while, for they floundered badly in the sand. It pleased me to think that they would be perched there on the silver log, pointed out to the sea like a sort of soul compass after I was dead. I fingered a box of razors in my pocketbook. Then I thought how stupid I was. I had the razors, but no warm bath. I considered renting a room. There must be a boarding house among all those summer places, but I had no luggage. That would create suspicion. Besides, in the boarding house, other people are always wanting to use the bathroom. I had hardly have time to do it and step into the tub when somebody would be pounding at the door. Two gulls on their wooden stilts at the tip of the bar meowed like cats. Then they flapped up, one by one, in their ash-colored jackets, circling my head and crying. Say, lady, you better not sit out there. The tide's coming in. The small boy squatted a few feet away. He picked up a round purple stone and lobbed it into the water. The water swallowed it with resonant plop. Then he scrabbled around, and I heard the dry stones clank together like money. He skimmed a flat stone over the dull green surface, and it skipped 7 times before it sliced out of sight. Why don't you go home? I said. The boy skipped another, heavier stone. It sank after the second bounce. Don't want to. Your mother's looking for you. She's not. He sounded worried. If you go home, I'll give you some candy. The boy hitched closer. What kind? But I knew without looking into my pocketbook that all I had was peanut shells. I'll give you some money to buy some candy. Arthur! A woman was indeed coming out to the sandbar, slipping and no doubt cursing to herself, for her lips went up and down between her clear, peremptory calls. Arthur! She shaded her eyes with one hand as if this helped her discern us through the thickening sea dusk. I could sense the boy's interest dwindle as the pull of his mother increased. He began to pretend that he didn't know me. He kicked over a few stones as if searching for something and edged off. I shivered. The stones lay lumpish and cold under my bare feet. I thought longingly of the black shoes on the beach. A wave drew back like a hand, then advanced and touched my foot. The drench seemed to come off the sea floor itself, where blind white fish ferried themselves by their own light through the great polar coal. I saw sharks' teeth and whales' ear bones littered about down there like gravestones. I waited, as if the sea could make my decision for me. A second wave collapsed over my feet, leaped with white froth, and the chill gripped my ankles with a mortal ache. My flesh winced in cowardice from such a death. I picked up my pocketbook and started back over the cold stones to where my shoes kept their vigil in the violet light. That was chapter 12. Water, tea break, water and tea break and water. Forgot about lip balm. Oops, sorry. Let's continue. Chapter 13. Forgot to do a trigger warning. I think I should have a trigger warning. Is it too late for a trigger warning? Chapter 13. Of course his mother killed him. I looked at the mouth of the boy Jody had wanted me to meet. His lips were thick and pink, and a baby face nestled under the silk of white blonde hair. His name was Cal, which I thought must be short for something, but I couldn't think what it would be short for, unless it was for California. How can you be so sure she killed him? I said. Cal was supposed to be very intelligent, and Jody had said over the phone that he was cute and I would like him. And I wondered, if I had been my old self, if I would have liked him. It was impossible to tell. Well, first she says no, 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 and then she says yes, but then she says no, no again. Cal and I lay side by side on an orange and green striped towel on a mucky beach across the swamp from Lynn. Jody and Mark, the boy she was pinned to, were swimming. Cal hadn't wanted to swim. He had wanted to talk, and we were arguing about this play where a young man finds out he has a brain disease on account of his father's fooling around with unclean women, and in the end his brain, which has been softening all along, snaps completely and snaps completely and his mother is debating whether to kill him or not. I had a suspicion that my mother had called Jody and begged her to ask me out so I wouldn't sit around in my room all day with the shades drawn. I didn't want to go at first, because I thought Jody would notice a change in me, and that anybody with half an eye would see that I didn't have a brain in my head. But all that during the drive north and then east, Jody had joked and laughed and chattered and not seemed to mind that I only said my, or gosh, or you don't say. We browned hot dogs on the public grills at the beach, and by watching Jody and Mark and Kyle very carefully, I managed to cook my hot dog just the right amount of time and didn't burn it or drop it into the fire, the way I was afraid of doing. And then I buried it in the and then when nobody was looking, I buried it in the sand. After we ate, Jody and Mark ran down to the water hand in hand, and I lay back staring into the sky, while Cal went on and on about this play. The only reason I remembered this play was because it had a mad person in it, and everything I had ever read about mad people stuck in my mind, while everything else just flew out. But it's the yes that matters, Cal said. It's the yes. She'll come back to the end of it. I lifted my head and squinted out at the bright blue plate of sea, a bright blue plate of a dirty rim, a bright round grey rock like the upper half of an egg poking out of the water about a mile from the stony headlands. What was she going to kill him with? I forget. I hadn't forgotten. I remembered perfectly well, but I wanted to hear what Cal would say. Morphia powders. Do you suppose they have morphia powders in America? Cal considered a minute. Then he said, I wouldn't think so. They sound awfully old-fashioned. I rolled over onto my stomach and squinted at the view in the other direction, towards Lynn. A glassy haze rippled out from the fires in the grills and the heat on the road, and through the haze, as through a curtain, through the haze, as through a curtain of clear water, I could make out a smudgy skyline of gas tanks and factory stacks and derricks and bridges. It looked one hell of a mess. I rolled onto my back again and made my voice casual. If you were going to kill yourself, how would you do it? Cal seemed pleased. I've often thought of that. I'll blow my brains out with a gun. I was disappointed. It was just like a man to do it with a gun. A fat chance I had of laying my hands on a gun, and even if I did, I wouldn't have a clue as to what part of me to shoot at. I had already read in the papers about people who had tried to shoot themselves, only they ended up shooting an important nerve and getting paralyzed or blasting their face off, but being saved by surgeons and a sort of miracle from dying outright. The risk of a gun seemed great. What kind of a gun? My father's shotgun. He keeps it loaded. I would just have to walk into his study one day and Cal pointed a finger to his temple and make a comical screw-up face. Click! He widened his pale gray eyes and looked at me. Does your father happen to live near Boston? I asked idly. Nope, in Clacton-on-Sea. He's English. Jody and Mark ran up hand in hand, dripping and shaking off water drops like two loving puppies. I thought there would be too many people, so I stood up and pretended to yawn. I guess I'll go for a swim. Being with Jody and Mark and Cal was beginning to weigh on my nerves, like a dull wooden block on the strings of a piano. I was afraid that at any moment my control would snap and I would start babbling about how I couldn't read and couldn't write and how I must be just about the only person who had stayed awake for a solid month without dropping dead of exhaustion. A smoke seemed to be going up from my nerves like a smoke from the grills and the sun-saturated road. The whole landscape, beach and headland and sea and rock, quavered in front of my eyes like a stage backcloth. I wondered at what point in space the silly sham blue of the sky turned black. You swim too, Cal? Jody gave Cal a playful little push. Oh! Cal hid his face in the towel. It's too cold. I started to walk towards the water. Somehow, in the broad, shadowless light of noon, the water looked amiable and welcoming. I thought drowning must be the kindest way to die, and burning the worst. Some of those babies in the jar that Buddy Willard showed me had gills, he said. They went through a stage where they were just like fish. A little rubbishy wavelet full of candy wrappers and orange peel and seaweed folded over my foot. I heard the zen thud behind me and Cal came up. Let's swim towards the rock over there. I pointed at it. Are you crazy? That's a mile out. What are you? I said. Chicken? Cal took me by the elbow and jostled me into the water. When we were about waist high, he pushed me under. I surfaced, splashing, my eyes seared with salt. Underneath, the water was green and semi-opaque as a hunk of quartz. I started to swim, a modified dog paddle, keeping my face towards the rock. Cal did a slow crawl. After a while, he put his head up and threaded the water. Can't make it! He was panting heavily. Okay, you go back. I thought I would swim out until I was too tired to swim back. As I paddled on, my heartbeat boomed like a dull motor in my ears. I am. That morning I had tried to hang myself. I had taken a silk cord from my mother's yellow bathrobe as soon as she left for work, and in the amber shade of the bedroom, fashioned it into a knot that slipped up and down on itself. It took me a long time to do this because I was poor at knots and had no idea how to make a proper one. And then I hunted around for a place to attach the rope. The trouble was, our house had the wrong kind of ceilings. The ceilings were low, white, and smoothly plastered, without a light fixture or a wood beam in sight. I thought with I thought with longing of the house my grandmother had before she sold it to come and live with us, and then with my Aunt Libby. My grandmother's house was built in the fine 19th century style with lofty rooms and sturdy chandelier brackets, and high closets with stout rails across them, and an attic where nobody ever went, full of trunks and parrot cages and dressmakers' dummies and overhead beams thick as a ship's timbers. But it was an old house, and she had sold it, and I didn't know anybody else with a house like that. After a discouraging time of walking about with a silk cord dangling from my neck like a yellow cat's tail and finding no place to fasten it, I sat on the edge of my mother's bed and tried pulling the cord tight. But each time I would get a cord so tight I could feel the rushing in my ears and a flash of blood in my face, my hands would weaken and let go, and I would be alright again. And then I saw my body had all sort of little tricks, such as making my hands go limp at the crucial second, which would save it time and time again, whereas if I had the whole say, I would be dead in a flash. I would simply have to ambush it with whatever sense I had left, or it would trap me in this stupid cage for 50 years without any sense at all. And when people found out that my mind had gone, as they would have to sooner or later, in spite of my mother's guarded tongue, they would persuade her to put me in an asylum where I could be cured. Only my case was incurable. I had bought a few paperbacks on abnormal psychology at the drugstore and compared my symptoms with the symptoms in the books, and sure enough, my symptoms tallied with the most hopeless cases. The only thing that I could read beside the scandal sheets were the abnormal psychology books. It was as if some slim opening had been left so I could learn all I needed to know about my case to end it in a proper way. I wondered, after all that hanging fiasco, if I shouldn't just give it up and turn myself over to the doctors. But then I remembered Dr. Gordon and his private shock machine. Once I was locked up, they could use that on me all the time. And the thought of how my mother and brother and friends would visit me day after day, hoping that I would be better, and then their visits would slacken off, and they would give up hope. They would grow old. They would forget me. They would be poor too. They would want me to have the best of care at first, so they would sink all their money in a private hospital like Dr. Gordon's. Finally, when the money was used up, I would be moved to a state hospital where, with hundreds of people like me in a big cage in the basement. The more hopeless you were, the further away they hid you. Cal had turned around and was swimming in. As I watched, he dragged himself slowly out of the neck-deep sea. Against the khaki-colored sand and the green shore wavelets, his body was bisected for a moment, like a white worm. Then it crawled completely out of the green and onto the khaki and lost itself among dozens and dozens of other worms that were wriggling or just lolling about between the sea and the sky. I paddled my hands in the water and kicked my feet. The egg-shaped rock didn't seem to be any nearer than it had been. Cal and I had looked at it from the shore. Then I saw it would be pointless to swim as far as the rock because my body would take that excuse to climb out and lie in the sun, gathering strength to swim back. The only thing to do was to drown myself then and there. So I stopped. I brought my hands to my breast, ducked my head, and dived, using my hands to push the water aside. The water pressed in on my eardrums and onto my heart. I fanned myself down, but before I knew where I was, the water had spat me up into the sun, and the world was sparkling all about me like blue and green and yellow semi-precious stones. I dashed the water from my eyes. I was panting, as after the strenuous exertion, but floating without effort. I dived and dived again, and each time popped up like a cork. The grey rock mocked me, bobbing on the water easily, like a life buoy. I knew when I was beaten. I turned back. The flowers nodded like bright, knowledgeable children as I trundled them down the hall. I felt silly in my sage green volunteer's uniform and superfluous, unlike the white uniformed doctors and nurses, and even the brown uniformed women with their mops and their buckets of grimy water, who passed me without a word. And if I had been paid, no matter how little, I could at least count this a proper job. But all I got for a morning of pushing rounds of magazines and candies and flowers was a free lunch. My mother said the cure for thinking too much about yourself was helping somebody who was way worse than you. So Teresa had arranged for me to sign on as a volunteer at our local hospital. It was difficult to be a volunteer at this hospital because that's what all the junior league women wanted to do. But luckily for me, a lot of them were away on vacation. I had hoped that they would send me to a ward with some really gruesome cases, who would see through my numb face to how I meant well, and be grateful. But the head of the volunteers, a society lady at our church, took one look at me and said, "You're on maternity." So I rode the elevator up 3 flights to the maternity ward and reported to the head nurse. She gave me the trolley of flowers. I was supposed to put the right vases at the right bed in the right rooms. But before I came to the door of the first room, I noticed that a lot of the flowers were droopy and brown at the edges. I thought it would be discouraging for a woman who had just had a baby to see somebody plonk down a big bouquet of dead flowers in front of her. So I steered the trolley to a wash basin in an alcove in the hall and began to pick out all the flowers that were dead. Then I picked out all those that were dying. There was no wastebasket in sight, so I crumpled the flowers up and laid them in a deep white basin. The basin felt cold as a tomb. I smiled. This must be how they laid bodies away in the hospital morgue. My gesture, in its small way, echoed larger gestures of the doctors and nurses. I swung the door in the first room open and walked in, dragging my trolley. A couple of nurses jumped up, and I had confused impressions of shelves and medicine cabinets. "What do you want?" one of the nurses demanded sternly. I couldn't tell one from the other. They all just look alike. "I'm taking the flowers round." The nurse who had spoken put a hand on my shoulder and led me out of the room, maneuvering the trolley with her free, expert hand. She flung open the swinging doors of the room next to the one and bowed me in, then she disappeared. I could hear giggles in the distance till a door shut and cut them off. There were 6 beds in the room, and each had a woman in it. The women were all sitting up and knitting or rifling through magazines or putting their hair in pin curls and chattering like parrots in a parrot house. I had thought they would be sleeping or lying quiet and pale, so I could tiptoe around without trouble and match the bed numbers to the numbers inked on the adhesive tape on the vases. But before I had a chance to get my bearings, a bright jazzy blonde with a sharp triangular face beckoned to me. I approached her, leaving the trolley in the middle of the floor. Then But then she made an impatient gesture, and I saw she wanted to bring the trolley too. I wheeled the trolley over to her bedside and with a helpful smile, "Hey, where's my larkspur?" A large, flabby lady from across the ward raked me with an eagle eye. The sharp-faced blonde bent over the trolley. "Here are my yellow roses," she said, "but they are all mixed with some lousy irises." Other voices joined the voices of the first two women. They sounded cross and loud and full of complaints. I was opening my mouth to explain that I had thrown a bunch of dead larkspur in the sink and some of the vases I had weeded out looked skimpy. There were so few flowers left, so I had joined a few flowers from the bouquets together to fill them out. When the swinging door flew open and the nurse stalked in to see what the commotion was. "Listen, nurse, I had this big bunch of larkspur Larry brought last night." She loused up my yellow roses. Unbuttoning the green uniform as I ran, I stuffed it in passing into a wash basin with the rubbish of dead flowers. Then I looked at the deserted side of the steps down the street, two at a time, without meeting another soul. "Which way is the graveyard?" The Italian in the black leather jacket stopped and pointed down at the alley behind the white Methodist church. I remembered the Methodist church. I had been a Methodist for the first 9 years of my life before my father died and we moved and turned Unitarian. My mother had been Catholic before she was a Methodist. My grandmother and grandfather and my Aunt Libby were all still Catholics. My Aunt Libby had broken away from the Catholic Church at the same time my mother did, but then she had fallen in love with an Italian Catholic, so she had gone back again. Lately, I had considered going into the Catholic Church myself. I knew that Catholics thought killing yourself was an awful sin, but perhaps if this was so, they might have a good way to persuade me out of it. Of course, I didn't believe in life after death or the virgin birth or the Inquisition or the infallibility of the little monkey-faced pope or anything. But I didn't have to let priests see this. I could just concentrate on my sin, and then he would help me repent. The only trouble was, church, even the Catholic Church, didn't take up the whole of your life. No matter how much you knelt and prayed, you still have to eat 3 meals a day and have a job and live in the world. I thought I might see how long you had to be a Catholic before you can become a nun, so I asked my mother, thinking that she would know the best way to go about it. My mother had laughed at me. "Do you think that they will take somebody like you right off the bat? Why? You have got to know all this catechism and credos and believe in them, lock, stock, and barrel. A girl with your sense." Still, I imagined myself going to some Boston priest. It would have to be Boston, because I didn't want any priest in my hometown to know that I had thought of killing myself. Priests were terrible gossips. I would be in black with my dead white face, and I would throw myself at this priest's feet and say, "Oh, Father, help me." But that was before people had begun to look at me in a funny way, like those nurses in the hospital. I was pretty sure that the Catholics wouldn't take in any crazy nuns. My Aunt Libby's husband had made a joke once about a nun that a nunnery sent to Teresa for a checkup. This nun kept hearing harp notes in her ears and a voice saying over and over, "Alleluia!" Only she wasn't sure, on being closely questioned, whether the voice was saying Alleluia or Arizona. The nun had been born in Arizona. I think she ended up in some asylum. I tucked my black veil down to my chin and strode in through the wrought iron gates. I thought it odd that in all the times my father had been buried in this graveyard, none of us had ever visited him. My mother hadn't let us come to his funeral because we were only children then, and he had died in a hospital, so the graveyard and even his death had always seemed unreal to me. I had a great yearning lately to pay my father back all those years of neglect and start tending his grave. I had always been my father's favorite, and it seemed fitting I should take on a mourning what my mother had never bothered with. I thought that if my father hadn't died, he would have taught me all about insects, which was his specialty at the university. He would also taught me German and Greek and Latin, which he knew, and perhaps I would be a Lutheran. My father had been a Lutheran in Wisconsin, but they were out of style in New England, so he had become a lapsed Lutheran, and then my mother said, a bitter atheist. The graveyard disappointed me. It lay at the outskirts of the town, on low ground like rubbish dump, and as I walked up and down the gravel path, I could smell the stagnant salt marshes in the distance. The old part of the graveyard was all right, with its worn flagstones and lichen-bitten monuments, but I soon saw my father must be buried in a modern part with dates in the 1940s. The stones in the modern part were crude and cheap, and here and there a grave was rimmed with marble like an oblong bathtub full of dirt, and rusty metal containers stuck up about where the person's navel would be, full of plastic flowers. A fine drizzle started drifting down from grey sky, and I grew very depressed. I couldn't find my father anywhere. Low, shaggy clouds scudded over the part of horizon where the sea lay, behind the marshes and the beach shanty settlements, and raindrops darkened the black mackintosh I had bought that morning. A clammy dampness sank through my skin. I asked the salesgirl, "Is it water repellent?" And she had said, "No raincoat is ever water repellent. It's just showerproof." And I asked her what showerproof meant. She told me that I better buy an umbrella. But I hadn't had enough money for an umbrella. What with bus fare in and out of Boston and peanuts and newspapers and abnormal psychology books and trips to my old hometown by the sea, my New York fund was almost exhausted. I had decided that when there was no more money in my bank account, I would do it. And that morning, I spent the last of it on a black raincoat. Then I saw my father's gravestone. It was crowded right up by another gravestone, head to head. The other people are crowded in a charity ward. The way people are crowded in a charity ward when there isn't enough space. The stone was made of mottled pink marble, like tin salmon, and all there was on it was my father's name, and under it two dates, separated with a little dash. At the foot of the stone, I arranged a rainy armful of azaleas I had picked from a bush at the gateway of the graveyard. Then my legs folded under me, and I sat down in the sopping grass. I couldn't understand why I was crying so hard. Then I remembered that I had never cried for my father's death. My mother hadn't cried either. She had just smiled and said what a merciful thing it was for him that he died, because if he had lived he would have been crippled and invalid for life, and he couldn't have stood that, and he would rather have died than had that happened. God, I'm sorry for butchering this paragraph. I laid my face to the smooth face of the marble and howled my loss into the cold salt rain. I knew just how to go about it. The minute the car tires crunched off the drive and the sound of motor faded, I jumped out of my bed and I jumped out of bed and hurried into my white blouse and green figured skirt and black raincoat. The raincoat felt damp still from the day before, but that would soon cease to matter. I went downstairs and picked up a pale blue envelope from the dining room table and scrawled on the back in a large, painstaking letters, "I am going for a long walk." I popped the message where my mother would see it the minute she came in. Then I laughed. I had forgotten the most important thing. I ran upstairs and dragged a chair into my mother's closet. Then I climbed up and reached for the small green strong box on the top shelf. I could have torn the metal cover off with my bare hands. The lock was so feeble, but I wanted to do things in a calm, orderly way. I pulled out my mother's upper right-hand bureau drawer and slipped the blue jewelry box from its hiding place under the scented Irish linen handkerchief. I unpinned the little keys from the dark velvet. Then I unlocked the strong box and took out the bottle of new pills. There were more than I had hoped. There were at least 50. If I had waited until my mother doled them out to me night by night, it would have taken me 50 nights to save up enough. And in 50 nights, college would have opened, and my brother would have come back from Germany, and it would be too late. I pinned the key back into the jewelry box among the clutter of inexpensive chains and rings and put the jewelry box back into the drawer under the handkerchief, returned the strong box to the closet shelf, and set the chair on the rug in the exact spot that I had dragged it from. Then I went downstairs and into the kitchen. I turned on the tap and poured myself a tall glass of water. Then I took the glass of water and the bottle of pills and went down into the cellar. A dim undersea light filtered through the slits of cellar windows. Behind the oil burners, a dark gap showed in the walls about a shoulder height and ran back under the breezeway out of sight. The breezeway had been added to the house after the cellar was dug and built out over this secret earth-bottom crevice. A few old rotting fireplace logs blocked the whole mouth. I shoved them back a bit. Then I set the glass of water and the bottle of pills side by side on the flat surface of one of the logs and started to heave myself up. It took me a good while to heft my body into the gap, but at last, after many tries, I managed it and crouched at the mouth of the darkness like a troll. The earth seemed friendly under my bare feet, but cold. I wonder how long it had been since this particular square of soil had seen the sun. Then, one after the other, I lugged the heavy, dust-covered logs across the whole mouth. The dark felt thick as velvet. I reached for the glass and bottle and carefully on my knees with bent head crawled to the farthest wall. Cobwebs touched my face with the softness of moth, wrapping my black coat round me like my own sweet shadow. I unscrewed the bottle of pills and started taking them swiftly between gulps of water, one by one. At first nothing happened, but as I approached the bottom of the bottle, red and blue lights began to flash before my eyes. The bottle slid from my fingers and I lay down. The silence drew off, bearing the pebbles and the shells and all that tatty wreckage of my life. Then, at the rim of vision, it gathered itself, and in one sweeping tide, rushed me to sleep. That was chapter 13. Yeah, very much trigger warning there. Let's continue. Chapter 14. We're currently reading Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, chapter 14. One second. Chapter 14. It was completely dark. I felt the darkness, but nothing else, and my head rose, feeling it like the head of a worm. Someone was moaning. Then a great, hard weight smashed against my cheek like a stone wall, and the moaning stopped. The silence surged back, smoothing itself as black water smoothed to its old surface, calm over a dropped stone. A cool wind rushed by. I was being transported in an enormous speed down a tunnel into the earth. Then the wind stopped. There was rumbling. There was a rumbling as of many voices, protesting and disagreeing in the distance. Then the voices stopped. A chisel cracked down on my eye, and a slit of light opened, like a mouth or a wound to the darkness, clamped shut on it again. I tried to roll away from the direction of the light, but my hands wrapped around my limbs like mummy bands, and I couldn't move. I began to think that I must be an underground chamber lit by blinding lights, and that chamber was full of people who for some reason were holding me down. Then the chisel struck again, and the light leapt into my head, and through the thick, warm, furry dark, a voice cried, "Mother!" Air breathed and played over my face. I felt the shape of a room around me, a big room with open windows. A pillow molded itself under my head, and my body floated without pressure between thin sheets. Then I felt warmth, like a hand on my face. I must be lying in the sun. If I opened my eyes, I would see colors and shapes bending in upon me like nurses. I opened my eyes. It was completely dark. Somebody was breathing beside me. "I can't see," I said. A cheery voice spoke out of the dark. "There are lots of blind people in the world. You'll marry a nice blind man someday." The man with the chisel had come back. "Why do you bother?" I said. "It's no use." "You mustn't talk like that." His fingers probed at the great aching bars over my left eye. Then he loosened something, and a ragged gap of light appeared, like a hole in the wall. A man's eye peered around the edge of it. "Can you see me?" "Yes." "Can you see anything else?" Then I remembered. "I can't see anything." The gap narrowed and went dark. "I'm blind." "Nonsense! Who told you that?" "The nurse." The man snorted. He finished tapping the bandages back over my eyes. "You are a very lucky girl. Your sight is perfectly intact." "Somebody to see you." The nurse beamed and disappeared. My mother came smiling around the foot of the bed. She was wearing a dress with purple cartwheels on it, and she looked awful. A big tall boy followed her. At first I couldn't make out who it was, because my eyes only opened a short way. But then I saw that it was my brother. "They say you wanted to see me." My mother perched on the edge of the bed and laid a hand on my leg. She looked so loving and reproachful, and I wanted her to go away. I didn't think I'd say anything. "They said you called for me." She seemed ready to cry. Her face puckered up and quivered like pale jelly. "How are you?" my brother said. I looked at my mother in the eye. "The same," I said. "You have a visitor." "I don't want a visitor." The nurse bustled out and whispered to somebody in the hall. Then she came back. "He would very much like to see you." I looked down at the yellow legs sticking out of the unfamiliar white silk pajamas they had dressed me in. The skin shook flabbily when I moved, as if there wasn't any muscle in it, and it was covered with a short, thick stubble of black hair. Who is it? Somebody you know. What's his name? George Bakewell. I don't know any George Bakewell. He says he's know you. Then the nurse went out, and a very familiar boy came in and said, Mind if I sit on the edge of your bed? He was wearing a white coat, and I could see the stethoscope. Sorry, okay. Fuck my life. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to learn how to pronounce this word. Stethoscope. Sorry. Stethoscope. It's so easy. Why am I fucking this up? I'm sorry. Stethoscope. 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 And I could see the stethoscope poking out of his pocket. I thought he must be somebody I knew dressed up as a doctor. I had meant to cover my legs if anybody came in, but now I saw it was too late, so I just let them stick out, just as they were, disgusting and ugly. That's me, I thought. That's what I am. You remember me, don't you, Esther? I squinted at the boy's face through the crack of my good eye, and the other hadn't opened yet, but the eye doctor said that it would be all right in a few days. The boy looked at me as if I were some exciting new zoo animal, and he was about to burst out laughing. You remember me, don't you, Esther? He spoke slowly, the way one speaks to a dull child. I'm George Bakewell. I go to your church. You dated my roommate once at Amherst. I thought I placed the boy's face then. It hovered dimly at the rim of memory, the sort of face to which I would never bother to attach a name. What are you doing here? I'm a houseman at this hospital. How could this George Bakewell have become a doctor so suddenly, I wondered. He didn't really know me either. He just wanted to see what a girl who was crazy enough to kill herself looked like. I turned my face to the wall. Get out, I said. Get the hell out and don't come back. I want to see a mirror. The nurse hummed busily as she opened one drawer after the other, stuffing the new underclothes and blouses and skirts and pajamas my mother had bought me into the black patterned leather overnight case. Why can't I see a mirror? I had been dressed in a sheath striped grey and white, like mattress tickling with a white, shiny red belt, and they had propped me up in an armchair. Why can't I? Because you better not. The nurse shut the lid of the overnight case with a little snap. Why? Because you don't look very pretty. Oh, just let me see. The nurse sighed and opened the top bureau drawer. She took out a large mirror in a wooden frame that matched the wood of the bureau and handed it to me. At first, I didn't see what the trouble was. It wasn't a mirror at all, but a picture. You couldn't tell whether the person in the picture was a man or a woman because their hair was shaved off and sprouted in bristly chicken feather tufts all over their head. One side of the person's face was purple and bulged out in a shapeless way, shading to the green along the edges, then to a sallow yellow. The person's mouth was pale brown, with a rose-colored sore at the corner. The most startling thing about the face was its supernatural conglomeration of bright colors. I smiled. The mouth in the mirror cracked into a grin. A minute after the crash, another nurse ran in. She took one look at the broken mirror and at me, standing over the blind white pieces, hustled the young nurse out of the room. Didn't I tell you? I could hear her say. But I only. Didn't I tell you? I listened with mild interest. Anybody could drop a mirror. I didn't see why they should get so stirred up. The other older nurse came back into the room. She stood there, arms folded, staring hard at me. 7 years bad luck. What? I said. The nurse raised her voice as if speaking to a deaf person. 7 years bad luck. The young nurse returned with a dustpan and brush and began to sweep up the glittery splinters. That's only a superstition, I said then. Huh! The second nurse addressed herself to the nurse on her hands and knees as if I wasn't there. And you know where they'll take care of her. From the back window of the ambulance, I could see the street after familiar streets funneling into the summery green distance. My mother sat on one side of me and my brother on the other. I had pretended I didn't know why they were moving me from the hospital in my hometown to the city hospital to see what they would say. They want you to be in a special ward, my mother said. They don't want to have that sort of ward at our, they don't have that sort of ward in our hospital. I like it where I was. My mother's mouth tightened. You should have behaved better then. What? You shouldn't have broken that mirror. Then maybe they would have let you stay. But of course, I knew the mirror had nothing to do with it. I sat in the bed with the covers up to my neck. Why can't I get up? I'm not sick. Ward rounds, the nurse said. You can't get up after the ward rounds. She shoved the bed curtains back and revealed a fat young Italian woman in the next bed. The Italian woman had a mass of tight black curls starting at her forehead that rose in a mountainous pompadour and cascaded down her back. Whenever she moved, the huge arrangement of her hair moved with her, as if made of stiff black paper. The woman looked at me and giggled. Why are you here? She didn't wait for an answer. I'm here on account of my French-Canadian mother-in-law. My husband knows that I can't stand her, and still he said she could come and visit us, and when she came, my tongue stuck out of my head. I couldn't stop it. They ran me into the emergency, and then they put me up here. She lowered her voice. Along with the nets. Then she said, What's the matter with you? I turned her my full face with the bulging purple and green eye. I tried to kill myself. The woman stared at me, then hastily she snatched up a movie magazine from her bed table and pretended to be reading. The swinging door opposite my bed flew open, and a whole troop of young boys and girls in white coats came in, with an older gray-haired gentleman. They were all smiling in bright artificial smiles. They grouped themselves at the foot of my bed. And how are you feeling this morning, Miss Greenwood? I decided. I tried to decide which one of them had spoken. I hate saying anything to a group of people. When I talk to a group of people, I always have to single out one and talk to him. And all the while I'm talking, I feel the others are peering at me and taking unfair advantage. I also hate people to ask cheerfully, How are you? When they know you are feeling like hell and expect you to say, Fine. Oh my god, I need to highlight this. So relatable. Sylvia? I also hate people to ask cheerfully how you are when they know you are feeling like hell and expect you to say fine. Yep, yep, yep. Yep, yep, yep. The woman stared at me, then hastily she snatched up a movie magazine from her bed table and oh, I already read that, sorry. Oh, oh, something is up with my... Okay, sorry. ちょっと待ってね. One quick... Okay. I feel lousy. Lousy, somebody said, and the boy ducked his head with a little smile. Somebody else scribbled something onto a clipboard, then somebody pulled a straight, solemn face and said, "And why do you feel lousy?" I thought some of the boys and girls in that bright group might well be friends of Buddy Willard. They would know I knew him, and they would be curious to see me, and afterward they would gossip about me among themselves. I wanted to be where nobody I knew could ever come. "I can't sleep," they interrupted me. But the nurse says that you slept last night." I looked round the crescent of fresh, strange faces. "I can't read." I raised my voice. "I can't eat." It occurred to me that I had been eating ravenously ever since I came to. The people in the group had turned from me and were murmuring in low voices to each other. Finally, the great headman stepped out. "Thank you, Miss Greenwood. You will be seen by one of the staff doctors presently." Then the group moved on to the bed of the Italian woman. "And how are you feeling, Mrs. Somebody said, and the name sounded long and full of L's, like Mrs. Tomolilo's or something. Mrs. Tomolilo giggled. "Oh, I'm fine, doctor. I'm just fine." Then she lowered her voices and whispered something I couldn't hear. One or two people in the group glanced in my direction. Then somebody said, "All right, Mrs. Tomolilo," and somebody stepped out and pulled the bed curtains between us like a white wall. I sat on one of the end of the wooden bench in the grassy square between the four brick walls of the hospital. My mother, in her purple cartwheel dress, sat at the other end. She had her head propped in her hand, index finger onto her cheek, the thumb under her chin. Mrs. Tomolito was sitting with some dark-haired, laughing Italians on the next bench down. Every time my mother moved, Mrs. Tomolilo imitated her. Now, Mrs. Tomolilo was sitting with her index finger on her cheek and her thumb under her chin, and her head tilted wistfully to one side. "Don't move," I told my mother in a low voice. "That woman is imitating you." My mother turned to glance round, but quick as a wink, Mrs. Tomolito dropped her fat white hand in her lap and started talking vigorously to her friends. "Why, no, she's not," my mother said. "She's not even paying any attention to us." But the minute my mother turned around to me again, Mrs. Tomolilo matched the tips of her fingers together, the way my mother had just done, and cast a black, mocking look at me. The lawn was white with doctors. All the time my mother and I had been sitting there, the narrow cone of sun had shone down between the tall brick walls. Doctors had been coming up to me and introducing themselves. "I am Dr. So-and-so, and I am Dr. So-and-so." Some of them looked so young, I knew they couldn't be proper doctors, and one of them had a queer name that sounded like Dr. Syphilis. So I began to look out for suspicious fake names, and sure enough, a dark-haired fellow who looked very much like Dr. Gordon, except he had dark black skin, where Dr. Gordon's skin was white, came up to me and said, "I'm Dr. Pancreas," and I shook my hand. After introducing themselves, the doctors all stood within listening distance, only I couldn't tell my mother that they were talking down every word we said without their hearing me, so I leaned over and whispered into her ear. My mother drew back sharply. Oh, Esther, I wish you would cooperate. They said that you don't cooperate. They said you won't talk to any of the doctors or make anything in the occupational therapy. I've got to get out of here, I told her meaningly. Then I'll be alright. You got me in here, I said. You get me out. I thought if only I could persuade my mother to get me out of the hospital, I could work on her sympathies, like that one boy with brain disease in the play, and convince her what was the best thing to do. To my surprise, my mother said, "All right, I'll try to get you out, even if only to a better place. If I try to get you out," she laid her hand on my knee. "Promise you'll be good?" I spun round and glared straight at Dr. Syphilis, who stood at my elbow taking notes on a tiny, almost invisible pad. I promise, I said in a loud, conspicuous voice. The Negro, sorry, okay, don't, okay, the black person, I'm not gonna say the end, like, it's Negro, but it just sounds bad, okay, in some way. The black person wheeled the food cart into the patient's dining room. The psychiatric ward at the hospital was very small, just two corridors in an L shape lined with rooms and an alcove of beds behind the OT shop where I was, and a little area with a table and a few seats by a window in the corner of the L, which was our lounge and dining room. Usually, it was a shrunken old white man that brought our food, but today it was a black woman. The woman was wearing a blue. The woman in blue stiletto heels. Oh, the black woman. Wait. Okay. Sorry. I cannot. Can I say the word Negro without getting into trouble? Negro. I just want to make it very clear, okay? It's not the other N word, but it's Negro. This is 1950s. That's how they write, okay? It's not my fault. Usually it was a shrunken old white man that brought our food, but today it was a Negro. The Negro was with a woman in blue stiletto heels, and she was telling him what to do. The Negro kept grinning and chuckling in a silly way. Then he carried a tray over to our table with three lidded tins tureens on it, then started banging on the tureens down. The woman left the room, locking the doors behind her. All the time the Negro was banging down the tureens and then the dinted silver and the thick white china plates, he gawped at us with big rolling eyes. I could tell we were his first crazy people. Nobody at the table made a move to take the lids off the tin tureens, and the nurses stood back to see if any of us would take the lids off before she came to do it. Usually, Mrs. Tomolino had taken the lids off and dished out everybody's food like a little mother, but they sent her home, and nobody seemed to want to take her place. I was starving, so I lifted the lid off the first bowl. "That's very nice of you, Esther," the nurse said pleasantly. "Would you like to take some beans and pass them around to the others?" I dished myself out a helping of green string beans and turned to pass the tureen to the enormous red-headed woman at my right. This was the first time the red-headed woman had been allowed up to the table. I had seen her once at the very end of the L-shaped corridor, standing in front of an open door with bars on the square inset window. She had been yelling and laughing in a rude way and slapping her thighs at passing doctors, and the white-jacketed attendant who took care of the people in the end of the ward was leaning against the hall radiator, laughing himself sick. The red-headed woman snatched the tureen from me and upended it on her plate. Beans mounted up in front of her and scattered over onto her lap, onto the floor like stiff green straws. "Oh, Mrs. Mole," the nurse said in a sad voice, "I think you better eat in your room today." And she returned most of the beans to the tureen and gave it to the person next to them, to Mrs. Mole, and let Mrs. Mole off. All the way down the hall to her room, Mrs. Mole kept turning round and making leering faces at us and ugly oinking noises. The Negro had come back and was starting to collect the empty plates of people who hadn't dished out any beans yet. "We're not done," I told him. "You can just wait." "Mama." The Negro widened his eyes in mock wonder. He glanced round. The nurse had not yet returned from locking up Mrs. Mole. The Negro made me an insolent bow. "Miss Mucky Muck," he said under his breath. I lifted the lid off the second tureen and uncovered a watch of macaroni, stone cold and stuck together in a gluey paste. The third and last tureen was chock full of baked beans. Now I knew perfectly well you didn't serve two kinds of beans together at a meal. Beans and carrots, or beans and peas, maybe, but never beans and beans. The Negro was just trying to see how much we would take. The nurse came back, and the Negro edged off at a distance. I ate as much as I could of the baked beans. Then I rose from the table, passing round to the side where the nurse couldn't see below my waist, and behind the Negro, who was clearing the dirty plates. I drew my foot back and gave him a sharp, hard kick on the calf of the leg. The Negro leapt away with a yelp and rolled his eye at me. "Oh, miss! Oh, miss!" he moaned and rubbing his leg. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't. You really shouldn't." "That's what you get," I said, stared him in the eye. Sip of water. "Don't you want to get up today?" "No." I huddled down more deeply in the bed and pulled the sheet up over my head. Then I lifted a corner of the sheet and peered out. The nurse was shaking down the thermometer she had just removed.
Strange.
Oh! Touching? Oh my god. I don't know if you didn't hear it, but my shoulder just made like a pop sound that's like crazy loud. Welcome, Mando. Thank you for always being in my stream. Yeah, I'm not gonna refresh my party finder because it's a very, very slow day. It's Friday, everyone's having fun. Except me, reading a very depressing book. But it's okay. I like it. I like the book so far. The nurse was shaking down the thermometer she had just removed from my mouth. "You see, it's normal." I had looked at the thermometer before she came to collect it, the way I always did. "You see, it's normal. Why do you keep taking it for?" I wanted to tell her that if only something were wrong with my body, it would be fine. I would rather have anything wrong with my body than something wrong with my head. Oh my god, this is... I need to highlight this, and then after that I'm going to tell my therapist. It's so true. I'd rather have anything wrong with my body than something wrong with my head. But the idea seemed so uninvolved and wearisome that I didn't say anything. I only burrowed down further in the bed. Then, through the sheets, I felt a slight annoying pressure on my leg. I peeped out. The nurse had set her tray of thermometers on my bed while she turned her back and took the pulse of the person who lay next to me, in Mrs. Tomolilo's place. A heavy naughtiness pricked through my veins, irritating and attractive as the hurt of a loose tooth. I yawned and stirred, as if about to turn over, and edged my foot under the box. "Oh!" The nurse's cry sounded like a cry for help, and another nurse came running. "Look what you have done!" I poked my head out of the covers and stared over the edge of the table, around the overturned enamel tray. A star of the thermometer shard glittered, and balls of mercury trembled like celestial dew. "I'm sorry," I said. "It was an accident." The second nurse fixed me with a baleful eye. You did it on purpose. I saw you. Then she hurried off, and almost immediately two attendants came and wheeled me and bed and all down to Mrs. Mole's old room, but not before I scooped up a ball of mercury. Soon after they had locked the door, I could see the negro's face, a molasses-colored moon risen at the window grating, but I pretended not to notice. I opened my fingers a crack, like a child with a secret, and smiled at the silver globe cup in my palm. If I drop it, it will break into a million little replicas of itself, and if I push them near each other, they would fuse without a crack into one whole again. I smiled and smiled at the small silver ball. I couldn't imagine what they had done with Mrs. Mole. That was chapter 14, guys. One quick break. And I'll be right back, okay? I'm back. Sorry, I forgot to eat lunch. So I had to like quickly stuff myself with something because I'm getting hungry. Anyway, that was chapter 14. That was not quite a long chapter. I think we are about how many percent into this book? We have like less than 100 pages to go, so it's still okay. Sorry, another quick break. I'll be right back. Something. I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. I'm back and then I was gone now. I'm back and now I'm gone. Sorry. Need to sorry. Water? It's a long stream, okay? I'm like I think I can do until like yeah. Yeah, I'm back again. Yeah. Since I'm free today, I'm trying to like read as much as possible. So at the next reading, I can finish up the book because right now I definitely cannot finish up the book because I think there's still quite a lot of like a lot of chapter to go. So thank you for staying with me for like reading. I'm sorry for like all these short breaks. I don't really usually do that. I just realized that as I was reading just now that I forgot to eat lunch and I was very hungry. So I had to go out to the kitchen and just like stuff my face or something. Just I'm so hungry. And I'm feeling a bit better now, so sugar level should be fine. Anyway, alright, let's continue. Currently we are reading Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, chapter 15. Philomena's Guinea's black Cadillac eased through the tight 5 o'clock traffic like a ceremonial car. Soon it would cross one of the brief bridges that arc the Charles, and I would, without thinking, open the door and plunge out through the stream of traffic to the rail of the bridge. One jump, and the water would be over my head. Idly, I twisted a Kleenex to small pill-sized pellets between my fingers and watched my chance. I sat in the middle of the back of the seat of the Cadillac, my mother on the other side of me and my brother on the other, both leaning slightly forward, like diagonal bars, one across each car door. In front of me, I could see the spam-colored expanse of the chauffeur's neck. sandwiched between the blue cap and the shoulders of a blue jacket, and next to him, like a frail exotic bird, the silver hair and emerald feathered hat of Philomena Guinea, the famous novelist. I wasn't quite sure why Mrs. Guinea had turned up. All I knew was that she had interested herself in my case, and that at one time, at the peak of her career, she had been in an asylum as well. My mother said that Mrs. Guinea had sent her a telegram from the Bahamas, where she read about me in a Boston paper. Mrs. Guinea telegrammed, "Is there a boy in the case?" If there was a boy in the case, Mrs. Guinea couldn't, of course, have anything to do with it. But my mother had telegrammed back, "No, it is Esther's writing. She thinks that she will never write again." So, Mrs. Guinea had flown back to Boston and taken me out of the cramped city hospital ward, and now was driving me to a private hospital that had grounds and golf courses and gardens like a country club, where she could pay for me as if I had a scholarship, until the doctors she knew of there had made me well. My mother told me that I should be grateful. She said that I had used up almost all her money, and if it weren't for Mrs. Guinea, she didn't know where I would be. I knew where I would be, though. I would be in the big state hospital in the country, cheek by jowl to this private place. I knew I should be grateful to Mrs. Guinea, only I couldn't feel a thing. If Mrs. Guinea had given me a ticket to Europe or a round the world cruise, it wouldn't have made one scrap of difference to me, because wherever I sat, on the deck of a ship, or at a cafe in Paris or Bangkok, I would be sitting under the same glass bell jar, stewing in my own sour air. I need to. Sorry, give me a second. I need to highlight this. I have a I have an affinity to highlighting things. If you can't tell already. Yeah. Let's repeat that, okay? Since the word bell jar is mentioned in this sentence. I knew I should be grateful to Mrs. Guinea, only that I couldn't feel a thing. If Mrs. Guinea had given me a ticket to Europe or a round the world cruise, it wouldn't have made one scrap of difference to me, because wherever I sat, on the deck of a ship or at a street cafe in Paris or Bangkok, I would still be sitting under the same glass bell jar, stewing in my own sour air. Blue sky opened its dome above the river, and the river was dotted with sails. I read it myself, but immediately my mother and my brother each laid one hand on the door handle. The tires hummed briefly over the grill of the bridge. Water sails, blue sky, and suspended gulls flashed by like an improbable postcard, and we were across. I sank back in the grey plush seat and closed my eyes. The air of the bell jar warded round me, and I couldn't stir. I had my own room again. It reminded me of the room in Dr. Gordon's hospital. A bed, a bureau, a closet, a table, and chair. A window with a screen but no bars. My window was on the first floor, and the window a short distance above the pine needle padded ground, overlooked wooded yard ringed with a red brick wall. If I jumped, I wouldn't even bruise my knees. The inner surface of the tall wall seemed smooth as glass. The journey over the bridge had unnerved me. I had missed a perfectly good chance. The river water passed me by like an untouched string. I suspected that even if my mother and brother had not been there, I would have made no move to jump. When I enrolled in the main building of the hospital, a slim young woman had come up and introduced herself. My name is Dr. Nolan. I am to be Esther's doctor. I was surprised to have a woman. I didn't think that they have woman psychiatrists. This woman was a cross between Myrna Loy and my mother. She wore a white blouse and a full skirt gathered by the waist at the waist by a wide leather belt and stylish crescent-shaped spectacles. But after the nurse had led me across the lawn to the gloomy brick building called Kaplan, where I would live, Dr. Nolan didn't come to see me. A whole lot of strange men came instead. I lay on my bed under the thick white blanket, and they entered my room one by one and introduced themselves. I couldn't understand why there should be so many of them, or why they would want to introduce themselves, and I began to think that they were testing me to see if I noticed there were too many of them, and I grew wary. Finally, a handsome, white-haired doctor came in and said that he was the director of the hospital. Then he started talking about the pilgrims and the Indians and who had the land after them and what rivers ran nearby and who had built the first hospital and how it had burned down and who built the next hospital until I thought he must be waiting to see when I would interrupt him and tell him that I knew all that about rivers and pilgrims was a lot of nonsense. But then I thought some of it might be true. So I tried to sort out what was likely to be true and what wasn't. Only before I could do that, I had said goodbye. I waited till I heard the voices of all the doctors die away. When I threw back the white blanket and put on my shoes and walked out into the hall, nobody stopped me. So I walked round the corner of my wing of the hall and down another longer hall, past an open dining room. A maid in green uniform was setting tables for supper. There were white linen tablecloths and glasses and paper napkins. I stored the fact that there were real glasses in the corner of my eye, the way a squirrel stores a nut. At the city hospital, we had drunk out of paper cups and had no knives to cut our meat. The meat had always been so overcooked we could cut it with a fork. Finally, I arrived at a big lounge with shabby furniture and a threadbare rug. A girl with a round pasty face and short black hair was sitting in an armchair reading a magazine. She reminded me of a Girl Scout leader I had had once. I glanced at her feet, and sure enough, she wore those flat brown leather shoes with fringed tongue flapping down over the front that are supposed to be so sporty, and the end of the laces were knobbed with little imitation acorns. The girl raised her eyes and smiled. I'm Valerie. Who are you? I pretended I hadn't heard and walked out of the lounge to the end of the next wing. On the way, I passed a waist-high door behind which I saw some nurses. Where is everybody? Oops, sorry. Sorry, wrong number, and I think it's a spam call. My apologies. Where is everybody? Out, the nurse said. The nurse was writing something over and over on little pieces of adhesive tape. I leaned across the gate of the door to see what she was writing, and it was E. Greenwood, E. Greenwood, E. Greenwood, E. Greenwood. Out where? Oh, OT. The golf course, playing badminton. I noticed a pile of I noticed a pile of clothes on the chair beside the nurse. They were the same clothes the nurse in the first hospital had been packing into the patent leather case when I broke the mirror. The nurse began sticking the labels onto the coats. I walked back to the lounge and couldn't understand what these people were doing, playing badminton and golf. They mustn't be really sick at all to do that. I sat down near Valerie and observed her carefully. Yes, I thought she might as well be in a Girl Scout camp. She was reading her tatty copy of Vogue with intense interest. What the hell is she doing here? I wondered. There's nothing the matter with her. Do you mind if I smoke? Dr. Nolan leaned back in the armchair next to my bed. I said no. I like the smell of smoke. I thought if Dr. Nolan smoked, she might stay longer. This was the first time she had come to talk to me. When she left, I could simply lapse into the old blankness. Tell me about Dr. Gordon, Dr. Nolan said suddenly. You don't like him. I gave Dr. Nolan a wary look. I thought the doctors must all be in it together, and that somewhere in this hospital, in a hidden corner, repose there reposed a machine exactly like Dr. Gordon's, ready to jolt me out of my skin. No, I said. I didn't like him at all. That's interesting. Why? I didn't like what he did to me. Did to you? I told Dr. Nolan all about the machine, the blue flashes and the jolting and the noise. While I was telling her, she went very still. There was a mistake, she said then. It's not supposed to be like that. I stared at her. If it's done properly, Dr. Nolan said, it's like going to sleep. If anyone does that to me again, I'll kill myself, Dr. Nolan said firmly. You won't have any shock treatments here. Or if you do, she amended, I'll tell you about it beforehand, and I promise you it won't be anything like what you had before. Why, she finished, some people even like them. After Dr. Nolan had gone, I found a box of matches on the windowsill. It wasn't an ordinary sized box, but an extremely tiny box. I opened it and exposed a row of little white sticks with pink tips. I tried to light one, and it crumpled in my hand. I couldn't think why Dr. Nolan would have left me with such a stupid thing. Perhaps she wanted to see if I would give it back. Carefully, I stored the toy matches in the hem of my new wool bathrobe. If Dr. Nolan asked me for the matches, I would say I had thought that they were made of candy and I had eaten all of them. The new woman had moved into the room next to mine. I thought she must be the only person in the building who was newer than I was, so she wouldn't know how really bad I was, the way the rest did. I thought I might go in and make friends. The woman was lying on her bed in a purple dress that fastened at the neck with a cameo brooch and reached midway between her knees and her shoes. She had rusty hair knotted in school marmish bun and thin silver-rimmed spectacles attached to her breast pocket with black elastic. Hello, I said, conversationally, sitting down on the edge of the bed. My name is Esther. What's your name? The woman didn't stir. She just stared up at the ceiling. I felt hurt. I thought maybe Valerie or somebody had told her that when she first came in how stupid I was. A nurse popped her head in at the door. Oh, there you are, she said to me. Visiting Miss Norris, how nice. and she disappeared again. I didn't know how long I sat there, watching the woman in purple and wondering if her pursed pink lip would open, and if they did open, what would they say? Finally, without speaking or looking at me, Miss Norris swung her feet in her thigh-black button boots over the other side of the bed and walked out of the room. I thought she might be trying to get rid of me in a subtle way. Quietly, at a distance, I followed her down the hall. Miss Norris reached the door of the dining room and paused. All the way to the dining room she had walked precisely, placing her feet in the very center of the cabbage roses that twined through the pattern of the carpet. She waited a moment and then, one by one, lifted her feet over the door sill and into the dining room as though stepping over an invisible shin-high stile. She sat down at one of the round linen-covered tables and unfolded a napkin in her lap. "It's not supper for an hour yet," the cook called out from the kitchen. But Miss Norris didn't answer. She just stared ahead of her in a polite way. I put up a chair opposite her at the table and unfolded a napkin. We didn't speak, but sat there in close, sisterly silence until the gong for the supper sounded down the hall. "Lie down," the nurse said. "I'm going to give you another injection." I rolled over on my stomach on the bed and hitched up my skirt. Then I pulled down the trousers of my silk pajamas. "My, what all have you got under there?" "Pajamas, so I won't have to bother getting in and out of them all the time." The nurse made a clucking sound. Then she said, "Which side?" It was an old joke. I raised my head and glanced back at my bare buttocks. They were bruised purple and green and blue from past injections. The left side looked darker than the right. "The right. You name it." The nurse jabbed the needle in and I winced, savoring the tiny hurt. Three injections, 3 times a day. The nurses injected me, and about an hour after each injection, they gave you a cup of sugary fruit juice and stood by watching me drink it. "Lucky you," Valerie said. "You're on insulin." "Nothing happens." "Oh, it will. I've had it. Tell me when you get a reaction." But I never seemed to get any reaction. Just grew fatter and fatter. Already I feel the new 2 big clothes my mother had bought. And when I peered down at my plump stomach and broad hips, I thought it was a good thing Mrs. Guinea hadn't seen me like this, because I looked just as if I were about to have a baby. "Have you seen my scars?" Valerie pushed aside her black bang and indicated 2 pale marks on either side of her forehead, as if at some point she had started to sprout horns but cut them off. We were walking, just the two of us, with the sports therapist in the asylum garden. Nowadays I was let out on walk privileges more and more often. They never let Miss Norris out at all. Valerie said that Miss Norris shouldn't be in Kaplan, but in a building for worse people called Weimar. "Do you know what these scars are?" Valerie persisted. "No. What are they?" "I've had a lobotomy." I looked at Valerie in awe, appreciating for the first time her perpetual marble calm. "How do you feel?" "Fine. I'm not angry anymore. Before I was always angry. I was in Weimar before, and now I'm in Kaplan. I can't go to town now, or shopping, or to a movie along with a nurse." "What will you do when you get out?" "Oh, I'm not leaving." "I like it here." "Moving day." "Why should I be moving?" The nurse went on blithely, opening and shutting my drawers, emptying the closet, and folding my belongings into a black overnight case. I thought, they must at last be moving me to Weimar. "Oh, you're only moving to the front of the house?" the nurse said cheerfully. "You like it. There's lots more sun." Well, when we came out into the hall, I saw that Miss Norris was moving too. A nurse, young and cheerful as my own, stood at the doorway of Miss Norris' room. Miss Norris's room, helping Miss Norris into a purple coat with a scrawny squirrel fur collar. Hour after hour, I've been keeping watch by Miss Norris's bedside, refusing the diversion of OT and walks and badminton matches and even the weekly movies which I enjoyed and which Miss Norris never went to, simply to brood over the pale, speechless circlet of her lips. I thought how exciting it would be if she opened her mouth and spoke, and I rushed into the hall and announced this to the nurses. They would praise me for encouraging Miss Norris, and I would probably be allowed shopping privileges and movie privileges downtown, and my escape would be assured. But in all my hours of vigil, Miss Norris hadn't said a word. Where are you moving to? I asked her now. The nurse touched Miss Norris's elbow, and Miss Norris jerked into motion like a doll on wheels. She's going to Weimar, my nurse told me in a low voice. I'm afraid Miss Norris isn't moving up like you. I watched Miss Norris lift one foot and then the other over the invisible stile that barred the front door sill. I have a surprise for you, the nurse said as she installed me in a sunny room in the front wing overlooking the green golf links. Somebody you know just about to come today. Somebody I know? The nurse laughed. Don't look at me like that. It's not a policeman. Then, as I didn't say anything, she added, She says that she's an old friend of yours. She lives next door. Why don't you pay her a visit? I thought the nurse must be joking, and that if I knocked on the door next to mine, I would hear no answer but go in and find Miss Norris, buttoned into her purple squirrel-collared coat and lying on her bed with her mouth blooming out of the quiet vase of her body like a bud of rose. Still, I went out and knocked on the neighboring door. Come in, called a gay voice. I opened the door a crack and peered into the room. A big, horsey girl in jopers, sitting by the window, glanced up with a broad smile. Esther! She sounded out of breath, as if she had been running a long, long distance and only just come to a halt. How nice to see you! They told me you were here. Joan? I said tentatively. Then, Joan! In confusion and disbelief, Joan beamed, revealing her large, gleaming, unmistakable teeth. It's really me. I thought you'd be surprised. That was chapter 15. Isn't it great to find a friend in the loony bin? Oh my goodness. Let's continue. We are currently reading Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, chapter 16. Chapter 16. Joan's room with its closet and bureau and a table and chair and white blanket with a big blue sea on it was a mirror image of my own. It occurred to me that Joan, hearing where I was, had engaged a room in the asylums on pretense, simply as a joke. That would explain why she had told the nurse that I was her friend. I never known Joan except at a cool distance. How did you get here? I curled up on Joan's bed. I read about you, Joan said. What? I read about you and I ran away. How do you mean? I said evenly. Well, John leaned back in Chin's flowered asylum chair. I had a summer job working for the chapter head of some fraternity like the Masons, but not like the Masons, and I felt terrible. I had these bunions, and I could hardly walk. In the last days, I had to wear rubber boots to work instead of shoes, and you can imagine what that did to my morale. I thought either Joan must be crazy wearing rubber boots to work, or she must be trying to see how crazy I was believing all that. Besides, bunions, not bunions, bunions. Besides, only old people ever got bunions. I decided to pretend I thought she was crazy and that I was only humoring her along. I always feel lousy without shoes, I say with an ambiguous smile. Did your feet hurt much? Terribly. And my boss, he had just separated from his wife. He couldn't come right out and get a divorce because that wouldn't go with this fraternal order. My boss kept buzzing me in every other minute, and each time I moved, my feet hurt like the devil. But the second I'd sit down at my desk again, buzz went the buzzer, and he would have something else he wanted to get off his chest. Why did you quit? Oh, I did quit more or less. I stayed off work on sick leave. I didn't go out. I didn't see anyone. I stole at the telephone in the drawer. I stole the telephone in a drawer and never answered it. Then my doctor sent me to a psychiatrist in this big hospital. I had an appointment for 12 o'clock and I was in an awful state. Finally, at 12:30, the receptionist came out and told me that the doctor had gone out to lunch. She asked me if I wanted to wait, and I said yes. Did he come back? The story sounded rather involved for Joan to have made up out of whole clothes, but whole cloth, but I led her on to see what would come next of it. Oh, yes, I was going to kill myself, mind you. I said, if this doctor doesn't do the trick, that's the end. Well, the receptionist led me down a long hall, and just as we got to the door, she turned to me and said, You won't mind if there are a few students with the doctor, will you? What could I say? Oh, no, I said. I walked in and found 9 pairs of eyes fixed on me. 9! 18 separate eyes! Now, if the receptionist had told me there were going to be 9 people in the room, I would have walked out on the spot. But there I was, and it was too late to do a thing about it. Well, on this particular day, I happened to be found wearing a fur coat. In August? Oh, it was one of those cold, wet days, and I thought my first psychiatrist. Anyway, this psychiatrist kept eyeing that fur coat the whole time I talked to him, and I could just see what he thought of my asking to pay the student's cut rate instead of the full fee. I could see the dollar signs in his eyes. Well, I told him I don't know what all about the bunions and the telephone in the drawer and how I wanted to kill myself, and then he asked me to wait outside while he discussed my case with the others. And when he called me back in, you know what he said? What? He folded his hands together and looked at me and said, Miss Gilling, we have decided that you would benefit by group therapy. Group therapy? I thought I must sound phony in an echo chamber, but John didn't pay any notice. That's what he said. Can you imagine me wanting to kill myself and coming round to chat about it with a whole pack of strangers, and most of them know better than myself? That's crazy. I was growing involved in spite of myself. That's not even human. That's just what I said. I went straight home and wrote the doctor a letter. I wrote him one beautiful letter about how a man like that had no business setting himself up to help sick people. Did you get an answer? I don't know. That was the other day I read about you. Oh, how do you mean? Oh, John said. About how the police thought you were dead and all. I've got a pile of clippings somewhere. She heaved herself up, and I had a strong, horsey whiff which made my nostrils prickle. Joan had been a champion horse jumper at the annual college gymkhana, and I wondered if she had been sleeping in a stable. Joan rummaged in her open suitcase and come up with a fistful of clippings. Here, have a look. The first clipping showed a big blown up picture of a girl with black shadowed eyes, black lips spread in a grin. I couldn't imagine where such a tarty picture had been taken until I noticed the Bloomingdale earrings and the Bloomingdale necklace glinting out of it with bright white highlights like imitation stars. Headline: Scholarship Girl Missing Mother Worried. The article under the picture told how this girl had disappeared from her home on August 17, wearing a green skirt and a white blouse, and had left a note saying that she was taking a long walk. The article reads, when Miss Greenwood had not returned by midnight, it said, her mother called the town police. The next clipping showed a picture of my mother and my brother and me grouped together in our backyard and smiling. I couldn't think who had taken that picture either until I saw I was wearing dungarees and white sneakers and remembered that was what I wore in my spinach picking summer, how Dodo Conway had dropped by and taken some family snaps of the three of us one hot afternoon. The article continues. Mrs. Greenwood asked that this picture to be printed in hopes that it will encourage her daughter to return home. Headline: Sleeping Pills Feared Missing with Girl. A dark midnight picture about a dozen moon-faced people in a wood. I thought the people at the end of the row looked queer and unusually short until I realized they were not people but dogs. Article writes, Bloodhounds used in search for missing girl. Police Sergeant Bill Hindley says, it doesn't look good. Headline: Girl found alive. The last picture showed policemen lifting a long limp blanket roll with a featureless cabbage head into the back of an ambulance. Then it told how my mother had been down in the cellar doing week's laundry when she heard faint groans coming from a disused hole. I laid the clippings on the white spread of the bed. You keep them, Joan said. You ought to stick them in a scrapbook. I folded the clippings and slipped them into my pocket. I read about you, Joan went on. Not how they found you, but everything up to that. I put all my money together and took the first plane to New York. Why New York? Oh, I thought it would be easier to kill myself in New York. What did you do? Joan grinned sheepishly and stretched her hands palm up. Like a miniature mountain range, large reddish veils upheaved across the white flesh of her wrist. How did you do that? For the first time it occurred to me, Joan and I might have something in common. I shoved my fist through my roommate's window. What roommate? My old college roommate. She was working in New York, and I couldn't think of any place to stay, and besides, I had hardly any money left, so I went to stay with her. My parents found me there. She had written them that I was acting funny, and my father flew straight down and brought me back. But you are all right now, I made it a statement. Joan considered me with her bright pebble eyes. I guess so, she said. Aren't you? I had fallen asleep after the evening meal. I was awakened by a loud voice. Mrs. Bannister! Mrs. Bannister! Mrs. Bannister! Mrs. Bannister! As I pulled out of sleep, I found I was beating on the bedpost with my hands and calling, The sharp, wry figure of Mrs. Bannister, the night nurse, scurried into view. Here, we don't want you to break this. She unfastened the band of my watch. What's the matter? What's happened? Mrs. Bannister Mrs. Bannister's face twisted into a quick smile. You have had a reaction. A reaction? Yes, how do you feel? Funny, sort of light and airy. Mrs. Bannister helped me sit up. You'll be better now. You'll be better in no time. Would you like some hot milk? Yes. And when Mrs. Bannister held the cup up to my lip, I fanned the hot milk down my tongue as it went down, tasting it luxuriously the way a baby tastes its mother. Mrs. Bannister tells me that you had a reaction. Dr. Nolan seated herself in the armchair by the window and took out a tiny box of matches. The box looks exactly like the one I had hidden in the hem of my bathrobe, and for a moment I wondered if a nurse had discovered it there and given it back to Dr. Nolan on the quiet. Dr. Nolan scraped a match on the side of the box. A hot yellow flame jumped into life, and I watched her suck it up into the cigarette. Mrs. B says you felt better. I did for a while. Now I'm the same again. I have news for you. I waited. Every day now, for I didn't know how many days I had spent the mornings and afternoons and evenings wrapped up in my white blanket in the deck chair in the alcove pretending to read. I had a dim notion that Dr. Nolan was allowing me a certain number of days, and then she would say just what Dr. Gordon had said. I am sorry. You don't seem to have improved. I think you would better have some shock treatments. Well, don't you want to hear what it is? What? I said dully, and braced myself. You are not to have any more visitors for a while. I stared at Dr. Nolan in surprise. Why, that's wonderful. I thought you'd be pleased. She smiled. Then I looked, and Dr. Nolan looked at the wastebasket beside my bureau. Out of all the wastebaskets poked the blood-red buds of a dozen long-stemmed roses. That afternoon, my mother had come to visit me. My mother was the only one in the long stream of visitors. My former employer, the lady Christian Scientist, who walked on the lawn with me and talked about the mist going up from the earth in the Bible and the mist being the error, and my whole trouble being that I believed in the mist, and the minute I stopped believing in it, it would disappear, and I would see I had always been well, and the English teacher I had in high school who came and tried to teach me how to play Scrabble because he thought it might revive my old interest in words, and Philomena Guinea herself, who wasn't at all satisfied with what the doctors were doing and kept telling them so. I hated these visits. I'll be sitting in my alcove or in my room, and a smiling nurse would pop in and announce one or the other of these visitors. Once they had even brought the minister of the Unitarian Church, whom I had never really liked at all. He was terribly nervous the whole time, and I could tell he thought I was crazy as a loon because I told him I believed in hell, and that certain people like me had to live in hell before they died to make up for what's missing out on it after death, since they didn't believe in life after death and what each person believed happened to him when he died. Oh my god, I love this one. It is highlighting time. I hated these visits because I kept feeling the visitors measuring my fat and stringy hair against what I had been and what they wanted me to be, and I knew they went away utterly confounded. I thought if they left me alone, I might have some peace. My mother was the worst. She never scolded me, but kept begging me with sorrowful face to tell her what she had done wrong. She said, oh, sorry. She said she was sure the doctors thought she had done something wrong because they asked her a lot of questions about my toilet training, and I had been perfectly trained at a very early age and given her no trouble whatsoever. That afternoon, my mother brought me the roses. Save them for my funeral, I had said. My mother's face puckered and she looked ready to cry. But Esther, don't you remember what day it is today? No. I thought it might be St. Valentine's Day. It is your birthday. And then, and that was when I had dumped the roses in her wastebasket. That was a silly thing for her to do, I said to Dr. Nolan. Dr. Nolan nodded. She seemed to know what I mean. I hated her, I said, and I waited for the blow to fall. But Dr. Nolan only smiled at me as if something had pleased her very, very, very much, and said, I suppose you do. Some people, that was chapter 16, by the way. Some people celebrate birthday. I don't, for various reasons. Various depressing reasons. I'll keep that to an AMA one day, okay? If there's even people in my fucking stream. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Let's continue. That's a lot. That's a lot. This book is a lot. Yeah, this book is a lot for people who struggle with this kind of things. Anyway, let's continue. We're currently reading Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, Chapter 17. Chapter 17. You're a lucky girl today. The young nurse cleared my breakfast tray away and left me wrapped in my white blanket like a passenger taking a sea air on the deck of a ship. Why am I lucky? Well, I'm not sure if you're supposed to know yet, but today you are moving to Belzies. The nurse looked at me expectantly. Belsize or Belzies? Okay, wait, give me 1 second. Okay, I need to find out. Yeah, Belzies, I think. Belzies, Belzies. Ah, Belsize. 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 Okay, sorry. You're moving, but today well, I'm not sure if you're supposed to know yet, but today you're moving to Belsize. The nurse looked at me expectantly. Belsize? I said, I can't go there. Why not? I'm not ready. I'm not well enough. Of course you're well enough. Don't worry. They wouldn't be moving you if you weren't well enough. After the nurse left, I tried to puzzle out this new move on Dr. Nolan's part. What was she trying to prove? I hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. And Belsize was the best house of all. From Belsize, people went back to work and back to school and back to their homes. Joan would be at Belsize. Joan with her physics books and her golf clubs and her badminton rackets and her breathy voice. Joan marking the gulf between me and the nearly well ones. Even since Joan left Kaplan, I had followed her progress through the asylum grapevine. Joan had walk privileges. Joan had shopping privileges. Joan had town privileges. I gathered all my news of Joan into a little bitter heap, though I received it with surface gladness. Joan was the beaming double of my old best self, specially designed to follow and torment me. Perhaps Joan would be gone when I got to Belsize. At least, at Belsize, I could forget about shock treatments. At Kaplan, a lot of the women had shock treatments. I could tell which one they were because they didn't get their breakfast trays with the rest of us. They had their shock treatments while we breakfasted in our bedrooms, and then they came into the lounge, quiet and extinguished, led like children by the nurses, and ate their breakfast there. Each morning, when I heard the nurses knock with my tray, an immense relief flooded through me because I knew I was out of danger for that day. I didn't see how Dr. Nolan could tell you when to sleep during a shock treatment if she had never had a shock treatment herself. How did she know the person didn't just look as if he was asleep, while all this time inside he was feeling all these blue volts and the noise? Piano music sounded from the end of the hall. At supper, I had sat quietly, listening to the chatter of Belsize women. They were all fashionably dressed and carefully made up, and several of them were married. Some of them had been shopping downtown, and others had been out visiting with friends. And all during supper they kept tossing back and forth these private jokes. "I'll call Jack," a woman named Dee Dee said. "Only I'm afraid he wouldn't be home. I know just where I could call him though, and he'll be in all right." The short, spry, blonde woman at my table laughed. "I almost had Dr. Loring where I wanted him today." She widened her starry blue eyes like a little doll. "I wouldn't mind trading old Percy in for a new model." At the opposite end of the room, Joan was wolfing her spam and broiled potato with great appetite. She seemed perfectly at home among these women and treated me coolly, with a slight sneer, like a dim and inferior acquaintance. I had gone to bed right after supper, but then I heard the piano music and pictured Joan and Dee Dee and Lubelle, the blonde woman, and the rest of them laughing and gossiping about me in the living room behind my back. They would be saying how awful it was to have people like me in Belsize, and that I should be in Weimar indeed. I decided to put a lid on their nasty talk. Draping my blanket loosely around my shoulders like a stole, I wandered down the hall towards the light and the gay noise. For the rest of the evening, I listened to Dee Dee thumb out some of her own songs on the grand piano, while the other women sat around playing bridge and chatting, just the way they would in college dormitory, only most of them were 10 years older college age. One of them, a great tall gray-haired woman with a booming bass voice named Mrs. Savage, had gone to Vassar. I could tell right away she was a society woman because she talked about nothing but debutantes. It seemed that she had 2 or 3 daughters, and that year they were all going to be debutantes, only that she had loused up the debutante party by signing herself into the asylum. Dee Dee had one song she called "The Milkman," and everybody kept saying that she ought to get it published. It would be a hit. First her hand would clop out a little melody on the keys, like a hoofbeats of a slow pony, and next another melody come in like the milkman whistling, and the two melodies went together. That's very nice, I said in a conversational voice. Joan was leaning on one corner of the piano and leafing through a new issue of some fashion magazine, and Dee Dee smiled up at her as if the two of them shared a secret. "Oh, Esther," Joan said then, holding up the magazine. "Isn't this you?" Dee Dee stopped playing. "Let me see." She took the magazine, peered at the page Joan pointed to, and then glanced back at me. "Oh, no, surely not." She looked at the magazine again and then at me. "Never." "Oh, but it is Esther, isn't it, Esther?" Joan said. Lubell and Mrs. Savage drifted together, and pretending I knew what it was all about, I moved to the piano with them. The magazine photograph showed a girl in a strapless evening dress of fuzzy white stuff, grinning fit to split, with a whole lot of boys bending around her. The girl was holding a glass full of transparent drink and seemed to have her eyes fixed over my shoulder or something that stood behind me, a little to my left. A faint breath fanned the back of my neck. I wheeled around. The night nurse had come in, unnoticed, on her soft rubber soles. "No kidding," she said. "Is that really you?" "No, it's not me. John's quite mistaken. It's somebody else." "Oh, say it's you!" Dee Dee cried. But I pretended I didn't hear her and turned away. Then Lubell begged the nurse to make a fourth at bridge, and I drew up a chair to watch, although I didn't know the first thing about bridge, because I hadn't had time to pick it up at college the way all the wealthy girls did. I stared at the flat poker faces of kings and jacks and queens, and listened to the nurse talking about her hard life. "You ladies don't know what it is, holding down two jobs," she said. "Nights I'm over here watching you." Lubell giggled. "Oh, we're good, with the best of the lot, and you know it." "Oh, you're all right." The nurse passed round a packet of spearmint gum, then unfolded a pink strap from a tin foil wrapper herself. "You're all right. All those boobies at the state place that worry me off my feet." "Do you work in both places, then?" I asked with sudden interest. "You bet." The nurse gave me a straight look, and I could see she thought I had no business in Belle's eyes at all. "You wouldn't like it over there one bit, Lady Jane." I found it strange that the nurse should call me Lady Jane when she knew what my name was perfectly well. "Why?" I persisted. "Oh, it's not a nice place like this. This is regular country club. Over there they've got nothing. No OT, no talk of, no walks." "Why haven't they got walks?" "Not enough employees." The nurse scooped in a trick, and Lubell groaned. "Believe me, ladies, when I collect enough do-re-mi to buy me a car, I'm clearing out." "Will you clear out of here too?" Joan wanted to know. "You bet. Only private cases from then on when I feel like it." But I stopped listening. I felt the nurse had been instructed to show me my alternatives. Either I got better, or I fell down, like burning, then burnout star, from Belsize to Kaplan to Weimar, and finally, after Dr. Nolan and Mrs. Guinea had given me up, to the state place next door. I gathered my blanket around me and pushed back my chair. "You cold?" the nurse demanded rudely. "Yes," I said, moving off down the hall. "I'm frozen stiff." I woke warm and placid in my white cocoon. A shaft of pale wintry sunlight dazzled the mirror and the glasses on the bureau and the metal doorknobs. From across the hall came the early morning clatter of the maids in the kitchen preparing the breakfast trays. I heard the nurse on the door next to mine at the far end of the hall. Mrs. Savage's sleepy voice boomed out, and the nurse went into her with the jingling tray. I thought with a mild stir of pleasure of the steaming blue china coffee pitcher and the blue china breakfast cup and the fat blue china cream jug with the white daisies on it. I was beginning to resign myself. If I was going to fall, I would hang on to my small comforts at least as long as I possibly could. The nurse rapped on my door and, without waiting for an answer, breezed in. It was a new nurse. They were always changing, with a lean, sand-colored face and sandy hair and large freckles polka dotting her bony nose. For some reason, the sight of this nurse made me sick at heart, and it was only she strode across the room to snap up the green blind that I realized part of her strangeness came from being empty-handed. I opened my mouth to ask for my breakfast tray, and but silenced myself immediately. The nurse would be mistaking me for somebody else. New nurses often do that. Somebody in Belsize must be having shock treatments unbeknownst to me, and the nurse had, quite understandably, confused me with her. I waited until the nurse had made her little circuit of my room, patting and straightening and arranging and taking the next tray to the Lubell one door farther down the hall. Then I shoved my feet into my slippers, dragging my blanket with me, for the morning was bright but very cold, and crossed quickly to the kitchen. The pink uniformed maid was filing a row of blue china coffee pitchers from a great battered kettle on the stove. I looked with love at the lineup of waiting trays, the white paper napkins folded in their crisp isoclisis triangle. Okay, sorry. I need to find out how to pronounce this word. I don't even know. Clericals. Isosceles. Oh my god. Isosceles. It's, wow. That's very, 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 very isosceles. Very specific triangle shape. Okay, hang on. I look. Wait. I look with love. I look with love at the line-up of waiting trays, the white paper napkins folded in their crisp isosceles triangles, each under the anchor of its silver fork, the pale domes of the soft-boiled eggs in the blue egg cups, the scalloped glass shells of orange marmalade. All I had to do was reach out and claim my tray, and the world would be perfectly normal. There's been a mistake, I told the maid, leaning over the counter and speaking in my low, confidential voice, a tone. The new nurse forgot to bring in my breakfast tray today. I managed a bright smile to show there were no hard feelings. What's the name? Greenwood. Esther Greenwood. Greenwood, Greenwood, Greenwood. The maid's warty index finger slid down the list of names of patients in Belsize and tacked up on the kitchen wall. Greenwood, no breakfast today. I caught the rim of the counter with both hands. There must be a mistake. Are you sure it's Greenwood? Greenwood, the maid said decisively as the nurse came in. The nurse looked questioningly from me to the maid. Miss Greenwood wanted her tray, the maid said, avoiding my eyes. Oh, the nurse smiled at me. You'll be getting your tray later on this morning, Miss Greenwood, you. But I didn't want to hear what the nurse said. I strode blindly out into the hall, not into my room, because that was where they would come to get me, but to the alcove, greatly inferior to the alcove in Kaplan, but an alcove nonetheless, in a quiet corner of the hall where Joan and Lubell and Didi and Mrs. Savage would not come. I curl up in the far corner of the alcove with my blanket over my head. It wasn't the shock treatment that struck me so much as the barefaced treachery of Dr. Nolan. I liked Dr. Nolan. I loved her. I had given her my trust on a platter and told her everything, and she had promised faithfully to warn me ahead of time if I ever had to have another shock treatment. If she had told me the night before, I would have lain awake all night, of course, full of dread and foreboding, but by morning I would have been composed and ready. I would have gone down the hall between two nurses, past Dee and Lubell and Mrs. Savage and Joan, with dignity like a person coolly resigned to execution. The nurse bent over me and called my name. I pulled away and crouched farther into the corner. The nurse disappeared. I knew she would return in a minute with two burly men attendants, and they would bear me, howling and hitting, past the smiling audience now gathered in the lounge. Dr. Nolan puts her hand. Sorry. Dr. Nolan puts her arms around me, hugged me like a mother. You said you would tell me! I shouted at her through the disheveled blanket. But I am telling you, Dr. Nolan said. I've come specially early to tell you, and I'm taking you over myself. I peered at her through the swollen lids. Why didn't you tell me last night? I only thought it would keep you awake. If I had known. You said you would tell me. Listen, Esther, Dr. Nolan said. I'm going over with you. I'll be there the whole time, so everything will happen right, the way I promised. I'll be there when you wake up, and I'll bring you back again. I looked at her. She seemed very upset. I waited a minute, then I said, Promise you'll be there? I promise. Dr. Nolan took out a white handkerchief and wiped my face. Then she hooked her arm in my arm like an old friend and helped me up, and we started down the hall. My blanket tangled about my feet, so I let it drop, but Dr. Nolan didn't seem to notice. We passed Joan coming out of her room. I gave her a meaning, disdainful smile, and she ducked back and waited until we had gone by. Then Dr. Nolan unlocked a door at the end of the hall and led me down a flight of stairs into the mysterious basement corridor that linked, in an elaborate network of tunnels and burrows, all the various buildings of the hospital. The walls were bright, white lavatory tiles with bulbs set at an intervals in the black ceiling. Stretchers and wheelchairs were beached there, and there against the hissing, knocking pipes that ran and branched in intricate nervous systems along the glittering walls. I hung on to Dr. Nolan's arm like death, and every so often she gave me an encouraging squeeze. Finally, we stopped at the green door with electrotherapy printed on it in black letters. I held back and Dr. Nolan waited. Then I said, Let's get it over with, and we went in. The only people in the waiting room beside Dr. Nolan and me were a pallid man in a shabby maroon bathrobe and his accompanying nurse. Do you want to sit down? Dr. Nolan pointed at a wooden bench, but my legs felt full of heaviness, and I thought how hard it would be to hoist myself from a sitting position when the shock treatment people come in. I'd rather stand. At last, a tall, cadaverous woman in a white smock entered the room from an inner door. I thought she would go up and take the man in the maroon bathrobe as he was first, so I was surprised when she came towards me. Good morning, Dr. Nolan, the woman said, putting her arm around my shoulders. Is this Esther? Yes, Miss Hui. Miss Hui? Miss Hui? Yes, Miss Hui. Esther said, Esther, this is Miss Hui. She will take good care of you. I've told her about you. I thought the woman must be 7 feet tall. She bent over me in a kind way, and I could see that her face, with the buck teeth protruding in center, had at one time been badly pitted with acne. It looked like maps of the craters on the moon. I think we can take you right away, Esther, Miss Hui said. Mr. Anderson wouldn't mind waiting, will you, Mr. Anderson? Mr. Anderson didn't say a word, so Miss Hui's arm around my shoulder and Dr. Nolan following, I moved into the next room. Through the slits of my eyes, which I didn't dare open too far, lest the full view strike me dead, I saw the high bed with its white drum-tight sheet and the machine behind the bed and the masked person. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman behind the machine, and other masked people flanking the bed on both sides. Miss Hui helped me climb up and lie down on my back. Talk to me, I said. Miss Hui began to talk in a low, soothing voice, smoothing the salve on my temples and fitting the small electric buttons on either side of my head. You'll be perfectly all right, and you won't feel a thing. Just bite down. And she said something on my tongue, and in a panic I bit down, and darkness wiped me out like a chalk on a blackboard. That was chapter 17. I can do one more chapter, I think. The chapters are a lot longer than the previous stream. Okay, let's continue. Chapter 18. We're currently reading Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, Chapter 18. Esther! I woke out of a deep, drenched sleep, and the first thing I saw was Dr. Nolan's face swimming in front of me and saying, Esther! Esther! Wait, someone calling me. I rubbed my eyes with an awkward hand. Behind Dr. Nolan, I could see the body of a woman wearing rumpled black and white check robes and flung out on the cot as if dropped from great heights. But before I could take it in anymore, Dr. Nolan led me through a door into fresh, blue-skied air. All the heat and fear had purged itself. I felt surprisingly at peace. The bell jar hung, suspended, a few feet above my head. I was open to circulating the air. It was like I told you it would be, wasn't it? Said Dr. Nolan as we walked back to Belle's Eyes together through the crunch of the brown leaves. Yes. Well, it will always be like that, she said firmly. You'll be having shock treatments 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I gulped in a long draught of air. For how long? That depends, Dr. Nolan said. On you and me. I took up the silver knife and cracked off the cap of my egg. Then I put down the knife and looked at it. I tried to think what I loved knives for, but my mind slipped from the noose of the thought and swung like a bird in the center of empty air. Joan and Dee Dee John and Didi were sitting side by side on the piano bench, and Didi was teaching John to play the bottom half of chopsticks while she played the top. I thought how sad it was. John looked so horsey, with such big teeth and eyes like two grey goggly pebbles. Why? She couldn't even keep a boy like Buddy Willard. And Didi's husband was obviously living with some mistress or other and turning her sour as an old fusty cat. I've got a letter, Joan chanted, poking her tousled head inside my door. Good for you. I kept my eyes on my book. Ever since the shock treatments had ended after a brief series of 5, and I had town privileges, Joan hung about me like a large and breathless fruit fly, as if the sweetness of recovery were something she could suck up by mere nearness. They had taken away her physics books and the piles of dusty spiral pads full of lecture notes that had ringed her room, and she was confined to grounds again. Don't you want to know who it's from? Joan edged into the room and sat down on my bed. I wanted to tell her to get the hell out. She gave me the creeps. Only I couldn't do it. All right. I stuck a finger in my place and shut the book. Who from? Joan slipped out a pale blue envelope from her skirt pocket and waved it teasingly. Well, isn't that a coincidence? I said. What do you mean, a coincidence? I went to my bureau, picked up a pale blue envelope and waved it at Joan like a parting handkerchief. I got a letter too. I wonder if they are the same. He's better, Joan said. He's out of the hospital. There was a little pause. Are you going to marry him? No, I said. Are you? Joan grinned evasively. I didn't like him that much anyway. Oh? No, it was his family that I like. You mean Mr. and Mrs. Willard? Yes. Joan's voice slid down my spine like a giraffe. I loved them. They were so nice, so happy, nothing like my parents. And I went over to see them all the time. She paused. Until you came. I'm sorry, then I added. Why didn't you go on seeing them if you liked them so much? Oh, I couldn't, Joan said. Not with you dating Buddy. It would have looked, I don't know, funny? I considered. I suppose so. Are you... Joan hesitated. Going to let him come? I don't know. At first, I thought it would be awful having Buddy come and visit me at the asylum. He would probably only come to gloat and hobnob with other doctors. But then it seemed to me that it would be a step, placing him, renouncing him in spite of the fact that I had nobody, telling him that there was no simultaneous interpreter, nobody, but that he was the wrong one, and I had stopped hanging on. Are you? Yes, Joan breathed. Maybe he'll bring his mother. I'm going to ask him to bring his mother. His mother? Joan pouted. I like Mrs. Willard. Mrs. Willard's a wonderful, wonderful woman. She has been a real mother to me. I had a picture of Mrs. Willard with her heather mixture tweed and sensible shoes and her wise maternal maxims. Mr. Willard was her little boy, and his voice was high and clear like a little boy's. Joan and Mrs. Willard, Joan and Mrs. Willard. I had knocked on Didi's door that morning, wanting to borrow some two-part sheet music. I waited a few minutes, then hearing no answer, thinking Didi must be out, I could pick up the music from her bureau. I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Even at Belsize, the doors had locks, but the patients had no keys. A shut door meant privacy, and was respected like a locked door. One knocked and knocked again, then went away. I remembered this as I stood, as my eyes half useless after the brilliance of the hall in the room's deep, musky dark. As my vision cleared, I saw a shape rise from the bed. Then somebody gave a low giggle. Two shape adjusted its hair, and two pale pebble eyes regarded me through the gloom. Didi lay back on the pillows, bare leg from her green wool dressing gown, and watched me with a little mocking smile. A cigarette glowed between her fingers of her right hand. I just wanted, I said. I know, she said Didi. The music. Hello, Esther, Joan said then, and her corn-harsh voice made me want to puke. Wait for me, Esther. I'll come play the bottom part with you. Now, Joan said stoutly, I never really liked Buddy Willard. He thought he knew everything. He thought he knew everything about women. I looked at Joan. In spite of the creepy feeling and in spite of my old ingrained dislike, Joan fascinated me. It was like observing a Martian or a particularly warty toad. Her thoughts were not my thoughts, nor her feelings my feelings, but we were close enough so that her thoughts and feelings seems a wry black image of my own. Sometimes I wondered if I had made Joan up. Other times I wondered if she would continue to pop in at every crisis of my life to remind me of what I had been and what I had been through and carry on her separate but similar crisis under my nose. I don't see what women see in other women, I had told Dr. Nolan in my interview that noon. What does a woman see in a woman that she can't see in a man? Dr. Nolan paused. Then she said, tenderness. That shut me up. I like you, Joan was saying. I like you better than Buddy. And as she stretched out on my bed with a silly smile, I remembered a minor scandal at our college dormitory when a fat, matronly breasted senior, homely as a grandmother and pious religion major, and a tall, ganky freshman with a history of being deserted at an early hour in all sorts of ingenious ways by her blind dates, started seeing too much of each other. They were always together, and once somebody had come upon them embracing. The story went in the fat girl's room. But what were they doing? I had asked. Whenever I thought about men and women and women and women, I could never really imagine what they would actually be doing. Oh, the spy had said, Millie was sitting on the chair and Theodora was lying on the bed and Millie was stroking Theodora's hair. I was disappointed. I thought I would have some revelations of specific evil. I wondered if all women did with other women was just lie and hug. Of course, the famous woman poet at my college lived with another woman, a stumpy old classical scholar with a cropped Dutch cut. And when I had told the poet I might well get married and have a pack of children one day, she stared at me in horror. But what about your career? She cried. My head hurt. Why did I attract this weird old woman? There was the famous poet and Philomena Guinea and JC and the Christian Scientist lady and the Lord knows who, and they all wanted to adopt me in some way, and for the price of their care and influence have me resemble them. I like you. That's tough, John, I said, picking up my book. Because I don't like you. You make me puke, if you want to know. And I walked out of the room, leaving John lying lumpy as an old horse across my bed. I waited for the doctor, wondering if I should bolt. I knew what I was doing was illegal. In Massachusetts, anyway because the state was a cram jam full of Catholics, but Dr. Nolan said this doctor was an old friend of hers and a wise man. What's your appointment for? The brisk white uniform receptionist wanted to know, taking my name off on a notebook list. What do you mean for? I hadn't thought anybody but the doctor himself would ask me that. And that communal waiting room was full of other patients waiting for other doctors, most of them pregnant or with babies, and I felt their eyes on my flat virgin stomach. The receptionist glanced up at me and I blushed. A fitting, isn't it? She said kindly. I only wanted to make sure so I know what to charge you. Are you a student? Yes. That will be half price then, $5 instead of 10. Shall I bill you? I was about to give him my home address where I would probably be by the time the bill arrived, but then the thought of my mother opening the bill and seeing what it's for. The other only address that I had in the innocuous box number which people use who didn't want to advertise the fact that they live in an asylum. But the thought that the receptionist might recognize the box number, so I said, I better pay now. And I peeled $5 off the roll in my pocketbook. The $5 was part of what Philomena Guinea had sent me as a sort of get well present. I wondered what she would think if she knew what use her money was being put for. Whether she knew it or not, Philomena Guinea was buying my freedom. What I hate is the thought of being under a man's thumb. I had told Dr. Nolan. A man doesn't have a worry in the world, while I've got a baby hanging over my head like a big stick to keep me in line. Would you act differently if you didn't have to worry about a baby? Yes, I said, but... And I told Dr. Nolan about the married woman lawyer and her defense of chastity. Dr. Nolan waited until I was finished, then she burst out laughing. Propaganda! She said, and scribbled the name and address of this doctor on the prescription pad. I lived nervously through the issue of baby talk. The fat, bright faces of babies beam up at me. Page after page, bald babies, chocolate-colored babies, Eisenhower-faced babies, babies rolling for the first time, babies reaching for the rattles, babies eating the first spoonful of solid food, babies doing all the little tricky things it takes to grow up step by step into an anxious and unsettling world. I smelled a mingling of pabulum and sour milk and salt called stinky diapers and felt sorrowful and tender. How easy having babies seems to the women around me. Why am I so unmaternal and apart? Why couldn't I dream of devoting myself to baby after fat pulling baby like Dodo Conway? If I had to wait on a baby all day, I would go mad. I looked at the baby in the lap of the woman opposite. I had no idea how old it was. I never did. With babies, for all I know, it could talk a blue streak and had 20 teeth behind its pursed pink lips. It held its little wobbly head on its shoulder. It didn't seem to have a neck, and observed me with a wise platonic expression. The baby's mother smiled and smiled, holding the baby as if it were the first wonder of the world. I watched the mother and the baby for some clue to their mutual satisfaction, but before I had discovered anything, the doctor called me in. You would like a fitting, he said cheerfully, and I thought with relief that he wasn't the sort of doctor to ask awkward questions. I had toyed with the idea of telling him I planned to be married to a sailor as soon as his ship docked at the Charleston Navy Yard, and the reason I didn't have an engagement ring was because we were too poor, but at the last moment I rejected and the appealing story and simply said yes. I climbed up the examination table thinking, I'm climbing to freedom, freedom from fear, freedom from marrying the wrong person, like Buddy Willard, just because of sex, freedom from the Florence Crittenden homes where all the poor girls go who should have been fitted out like me. Because of what they did, they would do anyway regardless. As I rode back to the asylum with my box in the plain brown paper wrapper in my lap, I might have been Mrs. Anybody coming back from the day in town with a stuffed cake for her maiden aunt or Felinese basement hat. Gradually, the suspicion that Catholics had X-ray eyes diminished, and I grew easy. I had done well by my shopping privileges, I thought. I was my own woman. The next step was to find the proper sort of man. And that was chapter 18. Guys, we did it. We're gonna continue. I don't know if I feel good tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow? I don't wanna promise. But yeah, we're gonna end today. It's been 3 hours. I'm tired. But we did it. We did it. Guys, we did it. Thank you for... I don't know if Ando's still here, if anyone's still here, but if you guys are still here, thank you very much for thank you for very much for staying with me for the entire 3 hours. That was a really long read, but I figure out that I think I have enough chapters for like the finale stream. I'll try to do it like this weekend. Probably should be fine, honestly. Yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem, to be honest. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Listening. Thank you so much for listening. It's a difficult read because there's so much like. Actually, I've like next time I'm gonna put like a trigger warning. It's too late now. We are like so deep into the book. Basically, yeah. I should. Maybe I should put like trigger warning into my the into my the YouTube backups, where people can like at least know that there's a lot of like mentions about different ways to kill yourself, basically. um yeah. Anyway, I never know how to end a stream, but thank you for listening. We are up to chapter 18 now, and then we are gonna continue with like chapter 19 the next stream, and I'm gonna finish it up for sure. So I'm gonna end the stream now, and I'm gonna go look for a very nice basho haiku for you guys to end the stream with. Trying to find like summer. Oh, this is good. I like this one. Okay. Okay. Thank you for today, for listening to my reading session. I'll be back soonish to finish the book, and then we're gonna start another book. And I don't know what book I'm gonna start. It's gonna be either Natsume Soseki or Kazuo Ishiguro, because I have like a bag. I've like a lot of new stuff. Like I bought some more of their books before Books Depository went down last year, and it's been a year, so there's been just been sitting around. I remember like receiving the books, and I like kind of like bookmark how many chapters I should read in one reading session, because some of the book is like really thick, especially Kazuo Ishiguro's new stuff. So yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna send you guys off with a very nice haiku. It's titled A Sunlit Field. Okay. 蝶の飛ぶばかりの中の日陰かな。A lone butterfly, a flutter over a field, over its shadow. 蝶の飛ぶばかりの中の日陰かな。A lone butterfly, a flutter over a field, over its shadow. And that's where I'm going to end you for today. And I'll see you guys next time. Okay? Take care of yourself. Hydrate. And stay awesome, guys. Oh, Swooty! Thank you for listening. Seriously, I love you guys so much. Oh, thank you for listening, Spooty. Thank you for listening, Ando, and whoever's lurking. If there's anyone lurking, thank you so much. I'll see you guys soonish. Okay, bye. Take care. Have a good evening. Go eat your dinner. Bye bye.